council to order. Maybe please have the roll call.
Councilmember Haroff.
Here.
Councilmember Way.
Here.
Councilmember Chu.
Here.
Vice Mayor Morrison.
Here.
And Mayor Hilmer.
Here. If you're able, would you please rise and join us in our Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. First item on this evening's agenda is public comment. Are there members of the public that would like to address items that are not on the agenda?
Yes, I have one brief
Yes,
comment.
ma'am. Please tell us who
Cindy
you are.
Winter, Greenbrae. This concerns the narrow path over the creek on the 101 northbound off-ramp. That is a very popular project in Larkspur. And at the June 11th Executive Committee meeting for TAM, Bill Whitney said that he and his staff had designed the path, and where the path joins the bent caps, those are those horizontal concrete beams that stick out on either side. That is a very precise and important point of attachment. So he thought they'd done a real good job, and I suspect that he had. But Caltrans has its own ideas, and they said, no, we will design it. And because Caltrans doesn't move very fast, it will probably be 6 months before that is done. And then that takes us to the holidays. So it will probably be the first of next year before there's much forward motion. But it is proceeding, and it will happen. So that's the good news. Thank you.
Thank you. Cindy, the beginning of your comment was we were not able to hear you because of the microphone. Could you tell us about which project you were referring?
All right.
The North-South Greenway?
Yeah, the major project is the narrow path over the creek along the 101 northbound off-ramp. That is a very well-used path, and people who use it are not happy because it is narrow and it can be dangerous. And so this project has been in the works for quite some time, and we're finally getting to near the finish line.
So this is the northern segment of the North-South Greenway.
Yes, and Bill said that he's aware of the southern section. He's very much aware of it. He has not forgotten that. But first things first was the gist of his comments.
Thank you very much.
If you have questions, ask him.
Okay. Are there other members of the public that would like to address comments that are not on the agenda this evening? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Carol Page, San Anselmo. At the May 22nd Board of Supervisors hearing on the San Anselmo flood risk project, Mayor Hilmer requested the oral comment period be expanded. I agree. Allowing 6 days between publication of the 1,100-page EIR and the supervisor's hearing defies Liz Lewis' description of an aggressive timeline. That was an abuse of the public's right to participate in the process, and it was followed by the county staff's cancellation of the June Flood Advisory Board meeting. Mayor Hilmer hoped also that a fair portion of the flood fees might be allotted to Larkspur's needs before all funds are exhausted. This is a justified and appropriate expression of concern by the mayor that is unlikely to be honored as the race for the DWR grant-funded projects rolls onward. I came tonight to repeat my concerns that the proposed upstream projects will cause Larkspur more flooding, more sediment buildup, with greater expenditures and public service demands than you may have imagined. And I believe Larkspur will receive less county assistance to mitigate these effects than you hope. The San Anselmo and Ross projects add carrying capacity to the creeks. This increased volume and speed will cause increased erosion and sediment transport. There is no explanation of what is to be done about the dysfunctional downstream channel, the capacity of which both the county and the Corps admit is less than the proposed project's discharges. What does Larkspur get? Higher walls, more pumps, submerged bypass conduits? After so many years of Freudian slip, of flood proposals based on questionable assumptions, my dear father's advice springs to mind. The best defense is a strong offense. I hope Larkspur will be unequivocal in warning that substantive consequences are likely to ensue, that you issue the warning early, hoping it will be a deterrent, but with absolute certainty that you are ready for the impending fight. I urge you to act to make sure Larkspur is neither silent nor underestimated. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there other members of the public that would like to address items that are not on this evening's agenda? That being the case, we'll move on to tonight's next item, which is the consent calendar. Are there items that council members would like to pull for further discussion or questioning? Are there members of the public that would like to pull any item from the consent calendar to ask questions or make comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion for adoption of the consent calendar.
I'll make that motion to adopt the consent calendar.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's been a motion and a second for adoption of the consent calendar. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. The next item on this evening's agenda is the city manager's oral report. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. First, as a reminder to the council and the public, for the months of July and August, we have one regular meeting scheduled, which is July 20th. We will otherwise be dark for the remainder of those 2 months. So folks who are monitoring city business and are interested in coming to council meetings, mark July 20. That'll be your one opportunity across those 2 months. Second,
City manager, can we just make a correction? It's July 18th.
Thank you, July 18. My bad. July 18th, sorry about that. The parade, 4th of July parade, we want to just remind folks to come out, celebrate. Public Works is already planning our portion for the route. Very excited about that. I know the mayor's planning some exciting celebrations for his participation and contribution to the parade this year, and the library plans to be out in full force again this year as participants. Tomorrow we will be revising our Fixing Our Roads website with up-to-date information on this year's program. Folks who live in and around Riviera Circle saw a lot of activity the last couple of days. That's one of our big projects this year, and the crews are out there now getting things ready as they start to launch the reconstruction of that road. Tomorrow evening will be the first official meeting of the Central Marin Fire Authority Council, which is at 6 p.m. at the CMPA Community Room, and public is more than welcome to attend. So again, that's at 6 p.m. And then 2 exciting things from our community services departments. First, from recreation, we're launching a partnership with Corte Madera to do concerts and movies in our respective parks, Pipe Park and Town Park. And so on June 29th from 6 to 8 p.m. in Piper, Zydeco Flames will be playing a show. And we'll invite the public, bring your lawn chair and make yourself comfortable. Should be a great time. And you can visit the recreation websites of both the city and the town to see the schedule for the summer. That's in Piper. And then lastly, really excited and proud that the library was successful again this year in obtaining a $5,000 grant for bilingual books. I think even our staff was surprised at how popular the Spanish books are that they obtained with last year's grant. This year they're going to purchase not only some more Spanish language books, but they're actually going to purchase some Chinese language books as well. the books that we purchased last year have been in very heavy circulation since we made them available to the public. So very excited to have gotten that grant again. With that, Mr. Mayor, I turn it back to you and the council.
Are there questions from council members for the city manager regarding his report this evening? All right, thank you very much. Thanks, Dan. The next item on the agenda are council members' oral reports and comments. Do we have any reports from council members this evening?
I do.
Councilmember Way.
Okay, I'll bring up general plan.
Yeah, you can do that. That's a
Okay.
good idea.
I have a few. One is a shared committee Kevin and I are on together. So, but the first that I wanted to bring up is since we met last, there have been 2 vegetation fires that we've all seen. One in San Rafael and one in the Greenbrae Hills just the other day, or was it even yesterday? So we are entering fire season, and it's very important that everyone in this room sign up for alertmarin.org. It's an opt-in only alert system that the county has. And you have to go online and register your cell phone. So yesterday, if there had been evacuations ordered, it would be the only way you would have, other than our law enforcement pounding on your door, it would have been your only notification. So please alertmarin.org. And also the Central Marin Police have put out emergency notification pamphlet that's available for you of all the other ways that our local law enforcement will be notifying people. Very important. So I just need to get that out there. Yesterday, we had a lot of mutual aid that helped in the fire in the Greenbrae Hills, but there were some evacuations going on, and it was really important that people know what those were. Alertmarin.org, do it. Second thing is Kevin and I sit on the General Plan Update Committee, and we met last night, and the topic for last night was community facilities and services, and this update will be going on throughout the course of this full year and probably into a little of next year, and all of those categories of the general plan that are required by the state that we are updating are available online, and it's a public process. Everyone's welcome to come. So yeah, last night's meeting was discussing our community-owned buildings that we own in Larkspur and our parks and our other facilities. So look forward to that, where you can participate in that. Lastly, several of us went to the Chamber of Commerce Mixer last night, which was held at the Marriott, and they wanted to make sure everybody is announced about their Chamber of Commerce wine stroll. Very popular. It's coming up in July. So that's happening. Last year they sold out 500 glasses. This year they ordered 750. So it's on July 21st, downtown. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up is to commend our colleagues in Mill Valley for winning the overall winner category City of Mill Valley did from the League of California Cities for their restoration of Miller Avenue. So they will be awarded at the League's meeting that is in September, the overall road improvement, which is great to hear in Marin that we're improving roads. So Mill Valley's Miller Avenue received that award. That's all.
Councilmember Haroff? I just have 2 quick announcements. One regarding Sonoma Marin area rail transit. The SMART train received a singular award from the state of California as the best rail project in the state this year, beating out Sacramento, San Jose, some other big players. Also, today I had the good fortune of speaking at the Tamalpais retirement community at one of their town hall meetings, giving them updates on what's going on with respect to infrastructure and the bridge and other things. And the one thing I want to share is I was accompanied by Fire Captain Don Stasiowski from Central Marin Fire, Captain Hamid Khalili from Central Marin Police, Battalion Chief Brent McTeague from Ross Valley Paramedic Authority, Sergeant Grady Joseph from Central Marin Police, and our wonderful library director, Janice Ackle, all receiving donation checks from the Tamalpais community for support of programs and equipment that directly connect to the residents there. So great comments made by all of our staff, and again, just reinforcing many of these people have worked with us for decades and have been through all the changes with our community, and the folks at the Tamalpais very much value our relationship, and they couldn't say enough nice things about the city and city staff, so I just wanted to share that with you. All right, with that, we'll move on to business items this evening. We have no public hearings. The first item is consideration of approval of the Transportation Authority of Marin's Transportation Sales Tax Renewal Expenditure Plan. And this evening we have Diane Steinhauser, Executive Director from the Transportation Authority of Marin, and some of her valuable staff are here to support her
Good
this
evening.
evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for the opportunity to return and talk with you briefly about our final transportation sales tax renewal expenditure plan. We were here, I believe, in April, and we have a short PowerPoint, and I'm getting the wonderful clerk to set me up here. Whoa, right there. Okay. If I may, I wanted to just briefly reply very quickly to a comment made in the public comment period about our North-South Greenway project. This is taking a bike path from the pedestrian overcrossing that goes roughly from the vicinity of Lucky Drive over to Redwood by Cost Plus Plaza, and extends a Class 1 path up and over the creek to connect to our completed sidewalk improvements leading to the ferry and the SMART station. That project was going to be ready to go to construction now. We're about 4 months delayed because of higher than anticipated costs and design reviews. It's a pretty intricate project working over the creek, and so we're going to be ready to go to construction in the October-November timeframe. So that's fully funded and will be under construction next spring. So just to give you a quick update on that. Anyway, we are here to request your approval of our transportation sales tax expenditure plan. According to the statute under which we are codified, any new expenditure plan, which we have, needs to receive a 50% plus approval of the cities or towns representing 50% plus of the population, as well as Board of Supervisors. You are the 9th jurisdiction we visited. No pressure, but they've all approved it, including the Board of Supervisors yesterday. And we're here to present some changes from last time we were here, to respond to comments and questions you raised, and to tell you a little bit about the rest of the process. We actually started in late 2016, but we really kicked off a formal effort about a year ago in May of 2017 with the formation of a 24-member Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee. They met over a 6-month period. They listened to all the requests for transportation funds countywide from all the sponsors that we have: transit, public works, special interests, sea level rise advocates, et cetera. And they came up with a plan. That plan was presented to the TAM board. They recommended a renewal of the existing tax, not an increase. They considered both. They recognized the environment was such that a renewal was probably going to be more supported in terms of our polling results by the public. And they moved some funds around within the plan to address current needs. The plan is 15 years old. It's not addressing our current needs. There's many things we can't spend money on. We can't spend money on that direct connector from 101 to 580, or the Narrows, or interchange improvements. Sea level rise, we're limited in crossing guards and how we spend funds there. Funds we spend on employer-employee support, funds we spend on electric vehicles, all that is not available to us in the current plan. The new plan has all that. So we're very much looking forward to continuing to work with you and the public to get this to the ballot in November. We got a lot of comments from the councils, the Board of Supervisors, public, and various partners. I'm going to touch on a few of these. One thing I did want to emphasize that these are local funds. They're under our discretion. They can't be taken away by the state. So once the public approves these, we'll have them available to us. And again, it's a continuation of the current tax. This is a no new tax plan that we're bringing forward for consideration. I'm going to just reference a couple of the significant elements we heard when we went on our road trip in March and April. We have an independent citizens oversight committee that will be retained. That group reports directly to the public, has Brown Act notified meetings, holds public hearings, issues reports. We put their last report back on the table if anybody'd like to pick up a copy. The Citizens Oversight Committee will be continued under the new plan. They have full access to our audit results, and as mentioned, their primary role is to inform Marin citizens on how the funds are being spent, and are they being spent in accordance with the expenditure plan. By the way, the expenditure plan you are considering will be fully contained in the ballot if we go to the ballot in November, which is still under consideration. Your role tonight is to approve the expenditure plan. The TAM board still has to decide in July whether to go on the ballot or not. So you're kind of passing judgment on whether this plan is adequate to address current needs with respect to your constituents. You receive about $125,000 a year currently. This will be increased to $208,000 a year. We've really opened up eligibility for our local street and road funds. You'll see several of the new categories of eligibility illustrated here. Flood management with respect to infrastructure, congestion relief, including school bus service if you so desire, alternative fuel infrastructure, including EVs, municipal fleet costs, and of course bike and ped facilities, which has always been a allowable element in our local street and road funds. You probably receive about double this amount under SB 1. I want to make sure I mention that there's a good chance SB 1 will be under threat and considered for repeal in November, and that's another very important thing to keep in mind in terms of local street and road funding. With a renewal, we heard from our public works group around the county they would like to have more money. We were able to increase it from 13 to 22%. But we had a lot of other hungry mouths to feed, and we're trying to do a lot while staying within a half-cent structure. So we were able to increase it somewhat and open up eligibility for the use. With respect to crossing guards, this was a very important topic to many of our parents and communities, and we are able to increase funding for crossing guards up from an original 4.2% to 7%. The funds we've had available historically in Marin from federal Safe Routes to School and state Safe Routes to School have dried up. Those programs don't exist any longer. So we pretty much rely on this fund source to do Safe Routes to School. Safe Routes to School has education and encouragement in the schools, safe pathway projects around schools, and crossing guards. Crossing guards costs have greatly exceeded the acceleration in revenue. We were looking at having to cut a number of guards, including one here in Larkspur, another one right on your border with Corte Madera. So by increasing these funds, we'll be able to save those 2 guard sites and many other sites around the county. There was concern raised in several jurisdictions about the fact that we're renewing in 2019 for 30 years. We would have expired in 2025. We're doing a renewal 6 years early, so in effect, we're extending the tax 24 years beyond its original expiration. But are we sure this is how we should spend the money? Well, you know, over a 30-year span of time. The TAM board took that question very seriously, and what they built into the plan is a very strict amendment process. At a 6-year point in time, they'll be reviewing the plan. They'll do a broad public outreach process, much as we just did with our expenditure plan committee. And then they can consider amendments, but the amendments have to come back to you. They have to come back to all the cities and towns for approval. But that gives a chance to move funds around as our landscape changes and technology changes with respect to transportation. We had some comments, and you commented on our alternative fuel electric vehicle program. Let me just skip to this. The TAM board chose to increase funding substantially in another program. I'm trying not to confuse you here, but we have a $10 vehicle registration fee. The board has put a significant amount of funds that have been carried over in that program into the EV program for the next 3 years. So working with the Clean Technology Advisory Working Group, that's a broad representation of interest groups in Marin on electric vehicles. We have over 1.1 million now to look at the best way to inspire electric vehicle acquisition, fleet vehicle turnover, charging stations available to the public, et cetera, over the next 3 years. So the board took that action. You can see from this list here just a couple of things in terms of analysis and planning that we'll be doing in the framework of the electric vehicle work. There was, again, flexibility in several categories within the plan that are now eligible for electric vehicle chargers. We have a small sea level rise category. We specifically mention eligibility for EVs there, our local streets and roads funding, and our Marin Transit Capital Program is also eligible to use their funds on electric vehicles. So we broadened out eligibility and we tackled that by bringing another fund source to the table. There was a request from several of our sustainability community partners to make sure one of our goals was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that's now been added in to the plan as a significant goal. Let me mention that over 75% of the funds in this plan are dedicated to non-automotive uses. So we're very proud of the fact that we are going to be looking at improving roads. But in terms of the highway and interchange improvements, we're looking at leveraging other funds. We have good news in that regard. Regional Measure 3, which passed Bay Area wide by about 55%, 60% in Marin, by the way. We were third amongst all the counties in the Bay Area, passed on June 5th. So we do have funds for our 580-101 connector, but we need a little bit of our own money to get the design done, to bring in local features that benefit the community, and to have a cushion. As you might know, with all great projects, you do an estimate in year 1, and by the time you go to construction year 4, it costs more than you planned on. So we do have a small amount of money. We hope to leverage RM3. We hope to also leverage SB1 money. RM3 also contains some funds for the Marin-Sonoma Narrows, a very important project in terms of importing labor into Marin County. We've got some pretty strong statistics regarding how many worker trips are coming into Marin every day. Let me just close with just a little bit of information on local school bus service. This was another area of strong interest. Marin Transit's going to continue under this plan to cover 100% of direct supplemental bus service to all of our high schools. They currently fund that, and they're going to be able to continue that with the funding they receive in this plan. We also have some additional funds available for yellow school bus service. Now, it's not enough, honestly, to do a full program county-wide, but it's a chunk that will get us started at looking at a fair, equitable way to distribute yellow school bus money. Marin Transit, you can see here, 2,500 daily trips are taken off the road during the commute period, including many to Redwood High and to other schools in your community that keep those trips off the road in terms of congestion reduction. They're very proud of the fact that they've been able to fund this supplemental service for many years. Youth Pass program, they also distribute over 2,000 annual passes. 94% of those are free and reduced passes, $1 a trip or a day for our youth from low-income families. Regarding yellow school bus in particular, it's a top priority for Marin Transit in a plan that was adopted by them this past spring. They're going to be developing a mechanism to, we call it normalize. It's really distribute yellow bus funding in an equitable fashion to all the school districts and cities and towns in Marin. They're going to work on that over the next year. We're going to keep looking for other money, and in that regard, next week on Thursday, the TAM board's going to consider the approval of $1.1 million in sales tax interest funds that we've collected dedicated to yellow school bus. So that will give a good plug to get yellow school bus service a little stronger, a stronger base for yellow school bus in Marin. So with that, there's the plan. Here we are out to all of our 11 cities, towns, and the Board of Supervisors asking for your approval of the plan. Late July, TAM will consider putting this on the ballot, request the supervisors to do so, and we hope we end up on the November ballot. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you for that efficient presentation. We've seen this information before, and we've seen it updated this evening. Are there questions of Diane from the council?
I just want to, yeah. I
Please,
have a
Vice
few
Mayor
questions.
Morris.
Diane, nice to see you. Thank you for the presentation. Great about the crossing guard, that's great, and reducing the greenhouse gas emission, and the congestions on the road. I'd like to know, where are we right now with the 580 connecting to 101? Where do we stand with that?
Well, the best news there is that the Regional Measure 3 program is dedicating funding to build that connector. I don't think I have the picture in this presentation of that connector that we're proposing. And if Regional Measure 3, which starts collecting and distributing money next spring, can start to give us funds to do outreach, design, environmental, right-of-way, we hope to be able to get going and be solidly underway a year from now.
Is that for sure we're going to get the funds?
Oh, that's for sure.
Okay.
It's dedicated in the legislation clearly for the connector. Now, the money in the measure, which we'll get a little sooner, will get us to the front of the line. If we can use some of our money to do design and environmental, you know, this is how this works. You go to the regional agency and say, hey, I'm ready to go. I used my own money to get to this point, finishing design and environmental work, which we know will take at least 2 years. Although we have a strong indication of support from San Rafael, where the project's located, and that's a good thing. And we should be able to, within a couple of years, begin construction on it if all goes well. The project we have planned does not take a tremendous amount of either commercial and no residential right-of-way, little slivers, and it's a great improvement in terms of traffic on
Yeah, we need it.
101.
Right.
So we hope to get that underway very soon. As soon as, if this measure passes, we don't start collecting till April. We'll be looking at a loan letter or borrowing of some sort to get started right away on working on that project. We are poised to start working on that project.
Good to hear, Diane.
Yeah.
And we'll be engaged directly from the
Absolutely.
board.
We're so happy you're on the board.
Absolutely.
Also, it's great news about the extra money coming to Larkspur. We need it, so the
Yes.
208,000. And then yellow school buses, the funding, we need it. So that's great to hear, because some of the kids pay up to $300 to $350 a year, and they just can't afford it to come back and forth to school. So it's really nice that you're going to put extra money into the yellow school bus funding
Yeah.
to help those kids afford it. That's what I heard, correct?
Absolutely. We're going to keep looking for money. Marine Transit's going to look for efficiencies within their program to try and direct more money to Yellow School Bus. We're putting in more money, maybe as soon as next week, to get that program going. So,
I look forward to seeing that.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Diane.
Sure.
Nice to see you.
Are there other council members that have questions or comments for Diane this evening? You want to
No, go ahead.
Councilmember Harrow.
We're sharing a mic tonight.
Yeah, sorry for that. I just had a question about your comments about support for electric vehicle infrastructure. I'm a little confused by what you said, because you're making a statement of creating eligibility for EV infrastructure projects, but eligibility for projects seems a bit different from actually making commitments to dedicate funding for EV infrastructure. So my question is, what commitments is TAM making in the context of the sales tax measure to actually spend money, dedicate money to promote that very important part of our local transportation infrastructure?
let me respond to that question. We went to 12 jurisdictions, and the question was raised whether they wanted to directly put funds in the sales tax measure for electric vehicles and infrastructure. And the answer in a strong majority of the jurisdictions was no. So hearing that, the TAM board opted to do both things that you question. One is to put new money into it, but it's not from the sales tax. It's from another fund source. And two is to make sure that there is coverage of electric vehicles in many of the categories in the sales tax, so that it could optionally be spent there. So it's a combination of both. But I must tell you, in most jurisdictions, I received direction that they did not want to relocate local street and road money or transit money into EVs. They felt that there was a significant enough pool of funds out in the world of grants, whether it's the Energy Commission, PG&E, the Volkswagen grant, the Air District, all of those are available to us for EV chargers and to grow our EV marketing and outreach program. We've been successful at getting some of those grants. We're going to continue to do so. So with that and the $1 million that they did dedicate for the next 3-year period, they felt that was adequate. And the community that we were working with, which some of them might have been here when we were here a month ago, we coordinated directly with them, and they were grateful and accepting of the proposal.
Okay, well, thank you for those comments. That explains it a little bit. It's disappointing news. It's actually disappointing to hear that other communities throughout Marin are not as supportive of further development of EV infrastructure within Marin County. I think that's a problem, and I would encourage TAM to continue to give further thought. I think that's a real deficiency, actually, in this proposal. Thank you.
Yeah, and that was not the comment from the councils. The comment was, do you want to reduce funding in another category for it? And they, if there was more money, they'd like to put more money into EVs. But with a flat half-cent, staying at half-cent, and the proposal to remove money from local streets and roads that came from the EV recommendation, the community, they said no. But let's try and do it another way. So I think you're going to see a continued commitment from TAM. And, there's going to be a review of this plan. Let's see how we do with the $1 million that we have and the grants we hope to capture and the spirit of cooperation that is developed around this. And then we'll take another look at it in 3 and 4 years and see where we're at.
Councilmember Chu has a question, but I just want to follow up with one recounting of the action at the town board. The group Cool the Earth, whose representatives appeared at this council, at the council meeting where you presented before us earlier, Cool the Earth was represented at that meeting, and they supported the TAM action on this plan. I just want you to know that. They took all this into account, and they vocally supported us acting to support this plan. Councilmember Chu.
Yes, as much a question as a comment, I think it's clarification. I worked on the last Measure A thing, so it's been a while, so I'm not familiar with everything that goes on with TAM anymore. But TAM was created as a congestion management agency, so arguably, the non-inclusion of EVs really doesn't reduce congestion. So, was any rationale discussed, to that point? That's kind of how I would see it to some degree as well. Elimination of greenhouse gas is a good thing, but it doesn't reduce congestion.
Well, and if I can point out, and I might even have that here somewhere, yes. We received a lot of direction in the 2 polls that we took in 2017 and 18, because we do need a 2/3 majority of the public to approve this. So we really have to pay attention to what the public expectation is. And we got that from the polls, and relieving traffic congestion, relieving congestion by improving intersections, building the connector, give us options to get to and from work to relieve congestion was very apparent in the poll results that we took. So we're looking at providing options to driving. We're looking at making operational improvements like the connector, like finishing the narrows, like improving interchanges. But we're also trying to keep a focus on safe routes to school and changing our culture from the youth up, as well as addressing electric vehicles, addressing innovation. All of that is intermingled in the details of the plan. So it's kind of a balancing act of making sure we address the public's concerns. We don't isolate our more needy groups of users in here in Marin, and we keep good things going that don't have any other way to be funded. So that's kind of all the balancing that we took into consideration.
Yeah, our biggest issue still is vehicle trips.
Well, and if I may, we have a projection of so many workers between 2012 and 2040, 16,900 new jobs in Marin County. And in just a short 5 years, from 2012 to 2017, we've added 14,000 of those 16,900 jobs. So we're importing a huge number of workers. And as many are coming up from the south, San Francisco, are coming down from the north in Sonoma. Even higher percentage across the Richmond Bridge every morning and across Highway 37. So we need to keep looking at the issue of housing. And that's not in this plan, and no funds in this plan are dedicated to housing. But it is one of the premier issues that is affecting our traffic congestion here in Marin County.
I just want to, do you have the
Yes.
you want to say? So Diane, I read in New York Times recently that in years to come with the autonomous cars, and like 3 out of my 4 kids do not own cars. They do Uber, Uber Pool, et cetera. So they say that there'll be more cars off the roads because a lot of people won't need to own cars because of all the extra, hires out you can do. Do you ever discuss, is that, and housing is definitely a need out there. But supposedly cars should be off the road, 20 years from now won't be as congested.
Absolutely.
Super.
In our category where we've got a modest 7% for highway improvements, we have a little bit of funding for commute alternatives and trip reduction. We're experimenting right now, we've had it operating for about a year, a Lyft rides program that brings people to and from the transit center or smart stations. And it's very successful, and ridership is climbing. So we subsidize $5 of the trip. So download the Lyft app, put in Get Smart 17, and you can use it. We're also looking at Marin Transit, and Nancy Whelan, our general manager, is here, has just instituted a pilot program for on-demand bus van service. So this is another option for people to call up through an app developed by VIA, to call up a transit vehicle, of ADA accessible, we always have to meet those requirements, and we do, accessible van to take you from where you need to go, to where you need to go. We're instituting bike share at all the smart stations. You're going to see it pop out next spring. We in Sonoma County got a $1 million grant from MTC to do that. We've been trying for 4 years on that. And we're looking at a carpool incentive program, as well as expanding our Lyft coverage and marketing and partnership. Lyft has been a good community partner with us. So we're experimenting. The one thing, we have a little bit of funding in the plan for innovation, tiny little bit, because again, we're keeping this at half cent, so you got to try and squeeze things in where you can. We're looking at mobility as a service, so stay tuned for that. Ideally, we give people an option to buy into mobility without owning a car, with a one-stop shop, and this is being experimented with around the region and around the state and nation, and we're getting on top of what we might be able to do here in Marin in that regard. And that's something your kids without cars will know much more about than we do probably, is the availability of those kinds of options. So.
Well, when there are fewer cars, I'm sure I'll be the first to notice. All right, other questions from the council?
Sure, I have some.
Councilmember Way.
Diane, thank you for the presentation. You did implement some changes that we had suggested at the last hearing. I do echo a little of Kevin's concern that many of our constituents at that public process had mentioned the electric vehicle charging stations and new technologies as being something they wanted more support for. I understand you have to balance the pie, but I would love to make sure we keep that forward because that was definitely something the Larkspur residents were interested in exploring better. I would just like you to elaborate on the comment you said about the yellow bus school service, should you so desire. What do you mean by should you so desire? Is that something that we're going to need to opt into a system, or is this going to be a more comprehensive?
Well, we have for the first time some dedicated funds in this plan for yellow school bus service, but it's not a lot. And as I mentioned, the TAM board is going to put additional funds into it as early as next week. still not enough to cover what really is an 8 to 10 to $11 million a year program. That's a quarter-cent sales tax right there, and we're not increasing the tax. And we're trying to protect, for equity purposes, seniors, youth, all the mobility options we offer now.
Right.
So what this is this is an allowance for you to decide with your local street and road funding if you want to put it into Yellow School Bus Service and work with
I
your
see.
school district. I'm sure Marin Transit is going to make themselves available, as they have to other jurisdictions, to coordinate and collaborate within the school district to allow that interaction to occur. So, and to enable good contracting and economies of scale and et cetera. They're already doing that. But this is really your money to decide. So that's what the opt-in is. Now, with SB1 putting even more money into local streets and roads, maybe you can free up some of this. Maybe not. It's up to you. Other than and we have new money that we're putting in the transit category. Again, it's moving the pegs around. 5% of the overall funding is going to go to school transportation.
Right.
And it wasn't dedicated prior to this plan. So that's the good news. More money from TAM from other sources. And then your local street and road money, it's really your decision.
Okay, that explains the should we so desire. Thank you.
Right.
I just want to clarify that any decisions we, as council members, might want to take into consideration, we should first check with our Public Works Director, given that we just adopted a budget and capital improvement plan, and these monies may have already been accounted for. So,
Yeah.
other questions of Diane from the council? Are there members of the public that would like to ask questions or make comments on this presentation this evening? Thank you very much, Diane. Any further discussion from the council on this?
No, I think there's a recommendation
All right.
before you, so.
We're going to
thank
bring it
you.
back to the council for discussion and action. Any discussion from the council? Councilmember Chu, would you like to start?
I don't have any additional comments, just thank you for coming, making this second presentation to us.
Vice Mayor Morrison, any further discussion on
I'm just ready to
item?
make a motion.
All right. Councilmember Way.
I think Kevin has some.
Councilmember Haroff.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the questions that I had about support within this framework for EV infrastructure. I remain disappointed that there is not more support for it. In my view, our society is, during the time frame of this 30-year sales tax, is going to be moving increasingly towards electrification of our transportation sector. And I think it's short-sighted not to be anticipating that and making provision for that in the finances that we're developing for transportation in this community. So I remain disappointed in that decision, however it came about. And although I think it's important for this measure to get in front of the voters this fall, I will be abstaining from a decision to approve this plan tonight.
Councilmember Way. All right. Councilmember Morrison, you said you were ready to make a motion.
To pass Resolution 5318, it's a resolution of the City Council of the City of Larkspur approving the Transportation Authority of Marin's final half-cent transportation sales tax renewal expenditure plan.
There's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm not going to oppose, but I'm going to abstain.
We have one abstention. 4 ayes. Thank you very much. We'll move to the next business item this evening, which is Magnolia Avenue bicycle and pedestrian improvements from Post Street to Doherty Drive, the Magnolia-Madrone intersection improvements, and the Doherty Drive at Redwood High School Safe Pathways projects. These are in our capital improvement plans for 2017, 2018, and carried forward from 2014. It's an awarding of a construction contract. May we have a staff report, please?
Good evening, Mayor Helmer, members of council, and members of the public. Julian Skinner, the Public Works Director. So we're here as a follow-up item to the last time we were here to discuss 3 bicycle and pedestrian improvement projects that are included in the capital program that we combined into one bid. So you approved at the last meeting going out to public bid for this combination project. We did go out to bid, and unfortunately, as has been the trend in Larkspur, Marin, and Northern California, we only received one construction bid for our project, and it was significantly over the engineer's estimate. So in a perfect world, I would be here asking you to approve a construction contract with the contractor, but given the discrepancy between their bid and our budgeted amounts and our engineer's estimate, I'm not able to make that recommendation. And so for your consideration tonight is a resolution that would allow the city manager to enter into a construction contract with that contractor for a modified, reduced scope of work. We still have to meet the intent of the grant award, so we can't simply build half of the project and use all of the grant money. So we have discussed with the contractor certain components of their bid that we feel are good value for the money and that we would like to extract, so that we can get some important components of these 3 projects built with some of the grant funding, not go beyond our budget and still meet the intent of the grant, and then follow up with some additional grant requests to complete the additional portions of the projects that we're not able to do at this time. So the resolution is a conditional award based on us being able to negotiate a contract with a contractor, the one contractor we had, for an amount that would not exceed the budgeted amount that you've already approved. So that's the resolution that's before you. The presentation that I have tonight is regarding one specific component of those 3 combined projects that we had some discussions about when we brought the plans to you for approval to go out to bid last time. And so that is, here's the location map that shows the 3 components of the project, some pathway improvements in front of Redwood High School on Doherty, and then 2 separate pedestrian projects on Magnolia, one at Post and one at Madrone. So what we're going to focus on tonight is the Magnolia Madrone portion of this project. As we discussed at the last meeting, we did receive a Transportation Development Act grant for improvements in this area. We did some preliminary design and public outreach that resulted in us looking more broadly at this specific location and not just at the one crosswalk. So we looked at the crosswalks in that general vicinity, which are on Magnolia, include at Madrone and then on either side at William and then at the Arch Street bus stop. Whoops. And so as a result of that traffic engineering analysis, we determined that of those 3 crosswalks, the Arch Street crossing was actually a safer crossing than the crossing at Madrone. And so at the last meeting when we went out to bid, we showed plans that included improving the Arch Street crosswalk instead of the Madrone crosswalk. And then the thought at that time was, as a way of promoting use of this new safer crosswalk, we would close the Madrone crosswalk. And as we discussed at that time, per the California Vehicle Code, if we're to close a crosswalk, we have to post that. And so we described a process where we would come back and award the bid, and at that time, we would discuss the posting and the public comment regarding the closing of that crosswalk. And so that's the follow-up that we're doing tonight. So here's the location map of this component of the project. So this is a Google Earth shot. And so the yellow lines are the streets. You can't actually see the streets for the most part because of the tree canopy, but the first red ellipse here is the intersection of Madrone and Magnolia. And then just to the north, that's the existing crosswalk that's at the bus stop or the extension of the Arch Street steps. And then down at the bottom, that's where William comes into Magnolia. So this map is oriented with north up. Now I'm going to flip it around a little bit. So in this diagram, Magnolia runs east-west, so across the page. I'm going to bring up some features of this corridor. And again, so what we're looking at here is Magnolia's running horizontal across the page. We have Madrone coming in from the top, and then William to the left and Arch to the right. And so The first thing I'm going to show here is this is the existing sidewalks in this area. So there's sidewalks on both sides of Madrone and Magnolia. There's only a sidewalk on the north side of William. There's no sidewalk on the south side of William. So those are the existing pedestrian facilities in this area. Then if we look next at the intersections that are out there. So starting at the south, first intersection is William. And so on the south side, you have a traditional crosswalk. So these are just the two lines that go across the street that guide a pedestrian where to cross. And then the next symbol is what we call a high visibility crosswalk, also commonly called a zebra crosswalk or a continental crosswalk. Those are the wide bars that go across for added visibility. And so that's crossing William following the sidewalks on Magnolia. And then the green arrow here shows what we call an implied crosswalk or a crosswalk that's not marked. Per the vehicle code, if you have a sidewalk on the street and you don't have a sign saying there isn't a crosswalk, then there's a crosswalk across the street. So technically legal to cross there. It's just not marked in its current configuration. And so that's William. You have the standard crosswalk across Magnolia on the south side, then you have a high visibility across the William leg, and then you have the unmarked crosswalk on the north side. Moving on to Madrone, we have two high visibility crosswalks. One crosses Madrone itself, then the other is on the north side of Magnolia. And then again, you have one of these implied crosswalks on the south side. And then at Arch, we also have an existing high visibility crosswalk. And so in looking at this corridor as we went through the grant application and then through the engineering analysis to determine what was best for this location, we analyzed the issues. And so one of the overwhelming issues at this location is visibility caused primarily by the shadows. So again, I'm showing the, I think this is from Marina, actually this is also a Google, but it's a 3D view. And again, you can see how the tree canopy is here. And one of the things here is it's not just that there's tree canopy and the intersection is always in shade. That would actually be better. The issue here is it's on the cusp of tree canopy and not tree canopy. So the crosswalk goes back and forth between shade and sunlight, and in various times of day, it's actually half in shade and half in sunlight, which is part of the issue. And again, here in the other ellipses are the other two intersections that we looked at. So here, just drilling down on that a little bit, we're looking at the left, driving south. On the right, we're looking driving north. The crosswalk is roughly in the middle of these photographs, so just where that that red line just landed. And then, so for both of these crossings, the black arrow points to a portion of the crosswalk that's in the shade, and then the other half of the crosswalk is in the sun. And so as a driver, you're looking out for pedestrians, and sometimes they're coming from sun to shade or vice versa, and you may be in sun or shade. And so this is one of the complicating factors with this particular crosswalk location. The other issue is the crossing length here. So what you're looking at is, again, we're looking south here. The blue arrow is stretched across where the existing Madrone crosswalk is. So it's going across 3+ lanes. There's actually 3 travel lanes. One north and south each on Magnolia, and then there's a right turn to Madrone, and then there's a little flare or a gore area that actually widens that crosswalk out that gives it that length. In the background there, a much smaller arrow, but it's in the background, but is showing that at William, you only have to cross 2 lanes at that crosswalk there, as opposed to the 3+ lanes at Madrone. And again, the shortest amount of time that a pedestrian is in a crosswalk, the safer it is. The more lanes, the more length, the longer they're potentially in conflict with a vehicle. So that's why a shorter crosswalk is, in general, everything else being equal, safer than a longer crosswalk. And again, here we're looking a little bit further back so that we catch the Arch Street crosswalk in the foreground. Again, at that location, it's only crossing 2 vehicle lanes. There are parking lanes or a bus stop there. So the curb-to-curb length is the same as down at Madrone, but at Madrone, you're actually crossing 3 vehicle lanes and not the 2 that you are here. The other thing I've highlighted here is to improve this crosswalk, one of the proposals is to actually install bulb outs. So the little shaded semicircles here kind of represent what would be concrete areas that would come out into the parking area so that a pedestrian is more visible and still technically on the sidewalk before they step off. So that they're more visible to the traffic coming in each direction. So Again, we'll go back to our map that shows a corridor. We've got our symbols still up there for the existing crossings. And now I'm going to start looking through what our traffic consultant recommended as the safest way to improve pedestrian crossings in this corridor. So the first thing they recommended was removing this long crosswalk at Madrone, and then doing improvements to the crosswalk at Arch. And so initially, as we applied for this grant, the grant application was to improve the crossing at Madrone, but as we went through the engineering analysis, we determined that the Arch crossing is a safer overall crossing location than the Madrone due to the length and due to the lack of the shadows. And so to make the safest crosswalk here, the grant proposal was to install flashing pedestrian activated lights. And so the thought is here to do those same improvements, put the flashing lights up, but do them at a crosswalk that is the safest of those out there. And so in that case, it would be Arch. And then the question of why remove Madrone is if we're going to improve Arch and make it a safer crosswalk, we'd like to promote its use and discourage people from crossing at Madrone and have them, in fact, cross at Arch. And then the next is to formalize that crosswalk at William. So one of the things if we decide to remove the crosswalk at Madrone, if people are heading to the north, then the Arch Street is not really out of their way. It's on the way north. The concern here was if people are heading south, then the crosswalk at William is actually on the non-sidewalk side of William, and so we thought it better to add high visibility crosswalk on the north side of William that lines up with where the sidewalk actually is on William. So that way we're replacing the crosswalk that was on Madrone with an enhanced crosswalk that's only 150 feet to the north. And if the people that would have used the Madrone crosswalk were going to head south, then we've added a high visibility crosswalk to the south at William. And then the other thing we would do while we're enhancing that intersection is we would take that standard crosswalk and turn it into a high visibility just for consistency at that intersection of William. And so this is an analysis that the traffic consultant did to see what the effects would be of removing the crosswalk. Again, the blue dots here represent all of the pedestrian paths for folks in that area, whether they're coming along Madrone or William or from either direction on Magnolia. And what is shown here in red are the movements that would be impacted by the removal of the Madrone crosswalk. So if you're following a path that's along the blue dots, the crosswalk at William and the one at the Arch Street steps don't take you any further out of your way than if the Madrone crosswalk were there. Really the only impacts to additional travel length are if you're heading along those red paths there. So if your ultimate destination is from Madrone to this pocket of businesses in between the two crosswalks, then the removal of the Madrone crosswalk actually does take you up to 150 feet out of your way to use the Arch as opposed to the Madrone that would have been there. But otherwise, if you're heading north or south or you're going down William from Adjourn, then the travel distances are the same. You're just crossing the street in a different location. So this is a section
Julie,
of the...
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Can you go back 2 slides? Do you see the implied crosswalk?
Yes.
It's still there?
Yes.
That still remains?
That is correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make
Yep.
sure I understood that.
I have a question too on the same thing, since
Yeah.
Mayor's asked. If you leave the implied crosswalk, wouldn't it make the old crosswalk also an implied crosswalk?
So there is, there's a slide a little bit further along that talks about how to deal with the removal of the Madrone crosswalk. Technically, because there's a sidewalk there, even if we remove the striping on the street, there is still a crosswalk and it still would be legal for somebody to cross there. That is an option. The other option is we enforceably remove the crosswalk by putting up signs that say there's no crosswalk here. That's what's required to technically remove a crosswalk. So you can remove the markings, which removes the guidance for people to cross there. but unless you put the signs up, there technically still is a crosswalk there.
Yeah, so now you've made it less safe. Yeah, because now you don't actually have lines there.
The lines don't, so the lines don't technically make a crosswalk safer. What the lines do is they are guiding people to a location where they can cross the street.
Yeah, but very few people really know about the motor vehicle code to this extent, so they're going to assume that there's no crosswalk there and someone's jaywalking.
Or the hope is, so the other option is when I get to the slides, there's a supplemental sign where it says no crosswalk that has an arrow and says use crosswalk, and it points to the crosswalk that's 150
Yeah,
feet away.
so that would be a good thing.
Yes, that would.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Many of us in the room have lived here long enough to see this go through several cycles, where it was there, then it wasn't there, then it was there, and now we're going to take out what we put in, and we're going to go through it all over again to see how many people cross when there's nothing on the pavement. Carry on.
Are we still asking questions about this William crossing?
It
Yes,
might be
please.
helpful to let Mr. Skinner finish,
right.
because you've asked several questions that he's alluding to are covered later in the slide presentation.
Please.
Okay, so this was the diagram that showed for the destinations where there would be actually an increased travel length to get to. This is a portion of the plans that shows the removal and the proposed improvements at the Arch Street, which is the bulb outs to reduce the crossing length, and also the rapid rectangular flashing beacons. So that's a picture of them on the right. Those are similar to the ones that were just installed in Corte Madera and have been used throughout Marin County. And so here's where we get to, if we do improve Arch Street in lieu of Madrone, what do we do with Madrone? And so this is a shot of the intersection. We're looking north on Magnolia here. So as I mentioned that technically to close a crosswalk and prohibit crossing there, you need signs. So we could simply blank out or grind out the crosswalk signs, which is our indication that we are not guiding people to cross in that location. It doesn't mean they can't. It just means that we're not recommending they cross there because we're not putting the guidelines in that says here's a place to cross the street. If we choose to prohibit crossing in that location, then we actually have to put barricades up. And these unfortunately are brown, so they don't show up in the photo. But basically you're putting up signs and barricades at both sides of where a crosswalk would be if there were to be one at that location. And so here's kind of what that would look like. And so I think you see in a lot of cities, they have the galvanized pipe with a sign on it. It doesn't have to be that. We kind of looked at if we put a low height fence, similar, this is the fence that's around Dolliver Park. So we could pick something that matched that, and then you just put a sign on it. You have your choice. It can be either one of the top two there, so the no crossing icon or the text that says no pedestrian crossing. And then you have the option to put the supplemental plaque that says use crosswalk. And in this case, it could point in both directions because we're providing crosswalks at both William and Arch. You could also, all that's required is a sign, but most jurisdictions put up a barricade similar to this to reinforce it because the sign's kind of at a low height and it can be ignored, whereas if you put a barricade up, it's a little bit more prominent and meaningful. So the staff recommendation, aside from the construction contract, is we're looking for guidance tonight because you did adopt the plans before we went out to bid. So we're looking for direction from you on whether to keep the staff recommendation, which is as went out to bid, which is to remove the Madrone crosswalk as a result of improving the Arch Street crosswalk. There are other alternatives that are improvements over what's there today. That includes improving the Arch Street crosswalk as we're proposing, but we leave the Madrone crosswalk as it is today. So folks have the opportunity to continue to use the Madrone crosswalk, or they can choose to go 150 feet down the street and use the new flashing lights at Arch. The next option requires additional funds, but we could technically put the flashing lights at both locations and make them both safer. We're estimating that's probably another $50,000, and given that we already have bids that are over budget, and we're scrambling to pick out pieces of this project to build anyway. I don't have a recommendation for where that other additional funding would come from at this time, but that's something we could go and investigate if that was the council's desire. And then the other alternative that's available is we could improve the Madrone crosswalk similar to we're proposing at Arch. It would be an improvement over what's there today. The traffic consultant simply recommended Arch because it has more pros than cons when compared directly with Madrone. But it would be a safety improvement to do those same improvements at Madrone and not do them at Arch. So that's the direction we're looking for tonight from council on how to proceed with this particular component. Because the vehicle code does require public posting on Friday, June 8th, I think it was, we did post out at the crosswalk, both at Arch Street and at Madrone, and notice that we planned on improving Arch, and as part of that, there was a proposal to remove the crosswalk at Madrone. I believe there's also a next door post that went out that described that, and I hand-delivered flyers to all of the businesses that were in that area where we showed. There would be an extra 150-foot path of travel to get to, and then a little bit on either side during that time to take some feedback.
A question? Under the alternatives, number 3 would not be adding that 150 feet, correct?
Correct.
All right, questions from council members?
I just have something to say.
Vice Mayor Morris.
So Julianne, I know you get tired of me saying this, but I think this is all very exciting. This needs an improvement, so this is great. I also want to congratulate you on getting the grants, not only for this one, but from Post by Lark Theater, and the one at Redwood. This is phenomenal. So thank you. So this is all good. A question, sidewalk improvement, so going towards William, is that what I heard? That's going to happen?
No, so the improvement at William is a crosswalk. There's only crosswalks on 2 legs of that intersection now, but not on the side of William that has the sidewalk. So the crossings of William on Magnolia don't align with the sidewalk.
Right.
There's a crosswalk that's on the non-sidewalk street, and then on the sidewalk side of the street, there's no crosswalk. So we thought it made sense to put a crosswalk on the sidewalk side.
All right, all right. So I'm interested in hearing what the public has to say, but I just want to say, great job on everything. Thank you.
Other council member questions? Council member Chu, and then council member Way, then Haroff.
I have a question for Sky. The discussion that we're having came about, right after there was an accident in that crosswalk. So that triggered a formal study. So if the study indicates that there is a safety issue and we leave the crosswalk where it is at Madrone, but put the lights in, and we haven't acknowledged that we've acknowledged that there's a safer location, what does that do to our potential liability?
I'd probably need to look at that more closely, but I don't, my understanding from the information that I've received about this is that the current condition doesn't constitute what's legally called a dangerous condition. And so typically city liability derives from knowledge of or the opportunity to know about and failure to investigate what's called dangerous condition. Although we know that there was a collision there, a vehicle on person collision, I don't necessarily, from what I understand, I don't think it actually constitutes a dangerous condition that creates municipal liability. I think what we're attempting to do is to create a safer condition. But I could certainly look into that more if you want.
Yeah, because if moving the crosswalk eliminates the danger of the contrast in light, but we haven't mitigated for that, then that's the circumstance that I'd like you to apply your analysis on.
Yeah, that's okay. Just to clarify, I mean, it's these are fine distinctions, but I'll try and simplify it as much as possible for everybody who's here tonight. there's a difference legally between a condition that's considered dangerous that creates liability for a city and a situation that could be made safer or improved by changes. And making changes or not making changes in the latter situation doesn't necessarily create liability for the city. It really boils down to whether or not the condition itself is considered dangerous.
Okay.
I have a question for Julian. Adding flashing under alternative 3, by adding flashing lights to the madrone, existing madrone condition, you would be making it safer.
Making Madrone crossing safer than it is today?
Yeah.
That's correct.
All right, Councilmember Way.
Sure. Hi, Julian. So the bulb outs you're talking about at the Arch Street stairs, do those require removing a parking space?
No.
So it would be in the area that is now a red zone in that part?
Correct. They're next to the bus stop where it's painted red.
Where it's painted red. And I think my question about the William crossing would not have flashing lights as the Arch Street ones would. And is that a
Correct.
cost reason, or is that a safety variable?
It's more of a function of the hierarchy of crosswalks and where they're located. William is, the crosswalk is at an intersection, whereas the Arch Street is technically, even though it's at the extension of Arch Street, it's considered a mid-block because it's not at a place where vehicles are turning. And so Arch Street on Collector is Magnolia, that's mid-block, would qualify for the flashing lights as an enhancement. Whereas if you go to William, it's just a 2-lane road. It's already at an intersection. It doesn't elevate to the needing the flashing lights. Whereas Madrone is 3 lanes, so it needs the flashing lights.
I see. Even though in well, I guess there are lots of places in Corte Madera and Tamalpais where there isn't a stop sign, but there are flashing lights as people cross. And in the last year, I recall they may have removed 2 or 3 crosswalks when they did that enhancement process. Is that correct? Along Tamalpais, I think it's about 2 or 3 that were removed so that they could guide people to a safer crossing?
Yeah, and for the most part, where they have the flashing lights is where there's either multiple through lanes or they also have turn pockets, so there's a wider crossing distance.
And I think it also is because they had a lot of outcry for parents, for students walking to school, trying to cross that large Tamalpais street. And I'm sure we'll probably hear from some parents whose kids are trying to cross this wide street too.
Right.
So, all right, those were my questions.
Councilmember Harrell.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation, and I think this is a great project, and I hope we're able to make it go forward. I'm just a little still confused about the economics here. I mean, obviously, we had an estimate that was significantly below what the contractor came in, and we're hoping that we can do some additional work with the contractor to look at the scope of what would be called for, and potentially access some additional fundings, possibly under Measure B, in order to make up the difference of that. Could you explain to me a little bit more how you anticipate that would work if we're actually going to be issuing the contract to Gelati, but we're kind of putting off the funding for the entire project in another context?
Right. So because the 3 projects were combined into one bid for purposes of economies of scale to make a larger project, to make it more attractive. But per the city's budget, they are still 3 separate projects with 3 separate funding sources. And so we've analyzed the bid and looked at the 3 components. They each have their own bid amount from Gelati that were in varying degrees over what the engineer's estimate was. And so the Doherty improvements in front of Redwood High School were significantly over the engineer's estimate. So whereas the crosswalk improvements on Magnolia were very close to the engineer's estimate, the bike path was kind of somewhere in between the Doherty numbers and the crosswalk numbers. And so our hope in discussing with Gelati is that we can take pieces of their bid that were close to the engineer's estimate that we have the funding for and move forward with those improvements. And then the pieces that we don't have, that we're not close enough between where our budget is and what their bid was, those would get pushed out. So based on my preliminary discussions with Gelati, I would anticipate you would see the crosswalk improvements on Magnolia. You would probably see a portion of the bike path next to the gas station on Magnolia. It's very unlikely, based on how the bids came in, that we're going to be able to arrive at a contract agreement for the Doherty Drive improvements in front of Redwood. So even though we're asking for the authority to award a contract up to our budget amounts, we're not going to spend all of that budget and only get half of the project done. I need that other half of the money to get the rest of the project done. So the thought was the Redwood project on Doherty has been split before. It's been out to bid. This is a third time we've tried to award that project. We obviously need some more funding. There are other grants out there. We have close to $300,000 from TAM sitting dedicated to that project. That is good funding to use as leverage to go out and get the next chunk of money we need to do that whole project all the way to Lucky, which is how it was initially envisioned. So I think what you're going to see is we're going to do the majority of the work on Magnolia. The work on in front of Redwood High School on Doherty is probably going to get pushed out, and you may see us come back with a grant application to do that whole project rather than just try and do a little piece of it now. That's my take. The other issue is the work on Doherty is very sensitive to the school year. We're paving Riviera Circle now. We've got about 10 weeks until school's back in session. It doesn't give us a whole lot of time to negotiate and look at value engineering, other ways to complete that project where we have a little bit more leeway for the work on Magnolia. So we will do our best to get what we think is an appropriate cost for the work that we're going to do. We're not going to spend all of our money and only do half of the project and leave the other half unfunded. We'll find a way to search for funding to get the other pieces we can't do.
But just as a follow-up, though, will the contract with Gelati encompass, even though we don't have the funding for all the project elements, will the contract with them commit us to using them in the future to complete what we want to do?
No, we will negotiate a scope of work that we can afford to do now and are prepared to do now, and that will be the limit of their contract. Any future portions of that work that need to be completed that are left out of this contract would have to be publicly bid again as part of a follow-up process.
Okay, that's helpful, because that was part of what was confusing to me.
Two quick questions. The business owners in the area where Perry's and the shops are, did they have any comment on the proposal?
I received, so I handed out 12 flyers in that area. I received 2 comments that were, other than thank you, we'll look at this. One was, I think it's a great idea. The other one was, it looks like a good idea, but I'm concerned people will still try and cross at Madrone, so I need to think about it.
One last question. Go to the slide where you describe alternatives to removing the Madrone crosswalk. The project plus this, whatever the outcome is of the decision about the slide, if the project plus alternative 3 were for somehow expressed as the preferred approach, that's still creating a more safe set of conditions than the existing.
And so if we were simply to install the rapid rectangular flashing beacons at the Madrone crosswalk, it would be an improvement over the crossing condition that exists there today.
The reason I keep bringing this back is before that crosswalk was installed, there was a perception that we needed to put one there because people were crossing without one. Now we're considering removing it. And there may be a sense that that crosswalk, even though it's not a traffic engineer's ideal, it's now considered part of the entry of those buildings and that development. So it's acting more like stage markings on the street for pedestrian orchestration than it is literal safety crosswalk by a traffic engineer's definition. So there's a little bit more complicated environment here that contributes to the character of the area. So I just want to put that in the discussion before I ask for public comment. Are there further council member questions? Vice Mayor Morris.
Did Parisi mention about people, when they make a right-hand turn into Madrone, that they're going past the crosswalk to make that turn. So they yield, but they're passing the crosswalk. I mean, that was a huge concern of Parisi. Is that correct? I see you're shaking your head.
Yeah, so part of the other, so in general, a crosswalk is better at an intersection than not at an intersection because it's more anticipated by a driver to be there. But at this location, because of the lengths of the crosswalks and because of the amount of traffic on Magnolia and some of the sight lines, sometimes the vehicles that are turning that are concentrating on looking for cars, the pedestrian falls out of their immediate concern. And so, yeah, the turning movements at that intersection are another one of the factors that lean towards the Arch
Which
Street
I've
being.
witnessed often.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Other council member questions? All right, other members of the public that would like to ask questions or make comments on this agenda item? Yes, please. Welcome.
Hi,
Please
thank you.
identify yourself for the record.
My name is Barry Lee Cole. I live in Madrone Canyon, 69 Wilson Way in Larkspur. I've lived in Larkspur since 2005. I lived in the house across from Pico. Currently, I've resided at the top of Madrone since 2014. I have 3 boys. I have tons of family friends in the neighborhood. I have witnessed numerous near accidents. There are children, nannies, fathers, mothers, bikes, all at that intersection, standing at the corner of Dark Park, where there might be a train of vehicles halfway down Dark Park and into Madrone, waiting to file out at 8 o'clock in the morning. This is a liability. It's a disaster waiting to happen. There have been so many times when I myself, due to the shadows, I'm driving as carefully as I can. I might not see a child. There are kids darting out all the time. The neighborhood is increasingly becoming more family-oriented. There are younger children all the time. Dark Park is a situation for children playing, parents, gatherings. It's my opinion that we should do something more than just crosswalk determination or changes or signage with flashing lights that lots of people don't see. I've lived in small towns my whole life, and it's not necessarily that pretty to put lights where I live, really substantial lights like we have in the middle of town here. However, given that Christmas Tree Hill, they have now stoplights coming down Redwood, en route to Camino Alto, taking a left. It's so much safer than it used to be. And I've been hiking Christmas Tree Hill for as long as I've lived here. So as much as it might be expensive, truly, the numbers of cars that break the law and heading south take a left into Perry's. Should there be, you can capitalize on this. We can have Larkspur Police handing, just sitting there and making money for this town. People break these laws all the time. It's a liability beyond, because somebody is going to get really badly hurt. It's not just maybe, it's when. So I really hope that the funding increases. And again, though it's not pretty, I think that just have lights going into Madrone, people could stop there, as people could stop and enjoy that bridge. That bridge in itself has sidewalks that are so narrow. So the kids are literally, when you're going out of Madrone as a vehicle, you have to kind of like lean forward because it actually has a rounded portion of the sidewalk that goes onto the bridge. So I implore you to do something more than this. I really think it would enhance this town and make it safer.
Just so I understand, are you suggesting a full signalization of that intersection?
Yeah,
All right. That's what I thought I heard
not
you say.
pretty, but,
Thank you very much for your comments. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Nick Knowles. I just have one question on that. Why couldn't you put the crosswalk on the south side of Madrone Canyon? Is there some reason that couldn't be an option. It's a very short crossing there, okay? And the kids wouldn't even have to, you know, when they have one, you put the light there. I'm just not sure why we need so many crosswalks. There's one on West Baltimore. There's two on William, right? There's one on Madrone, and there's Arch Street. What is that, like 200 feet, and we have that many crosswalks? I don't know. What's wrong with the south side? It's a short distance.
I think it goes into a driveway. Doesn't it go into the driveway?
No, you can't. You can only turn right into Perry's. So you would have to stop if the light was flashing, and you'd be on the other side of it. It would seem like to me. I think it'd be safer than crossing over Madrone Canyon, coming across that way. That's two
Can we
crosswalks.
clarify to him that it's not 5, it's actually 3? It's actually 2. So I think to clarify, what we're looking at is actually making 2 crosswalks, Arch and William, and those are the options.
Right here, they come straight across. The turn into Perry's is here. If there's a light here, why couldn't they just, that would slow people down turning into
Yeah.
here. This is an illegal left turn. Probably. But the point is, if the lights come on, you can't go across there until they're clear. So it might help also, like, I walk over there all the time. People just turn in there. You get almost run over every day, but.
Are you asking the Public Works Director to comment?
Yes, that's what I'm doing. What is wrong with that option?
So we did look at all of those crossing locations, and the advantage of the crosswalk that the gentleman is speaking about compared to the one that's there today is that it's shorter. It's still in the shadows, and it's at a location where there are half dozen redwood trees directly behind the curb ramp where people would be standing, waiting to cross the street. So the visibility of the pedestrians waiting there to cross the street was considered to be an issue. And then under the scenario, it was still considered that the Arch Street being out of the shadows was a superior crossing to that location. And then by adding the crosswalk on the north side of William, you're effectively taking care of the people that are heading south on Magnolia, so you wouldn't need the crosswalk at Magnolia. So it is a shorter crossing than the existing, but in our estimation, it still is not a safer crosswalk location than Arch because it's still at that intersection, it's still in the shadows. And it does have the added complication of having the pedestrian visibility on the one side for the redwood trees, and at the other side, it does land in a driveway, and we have to put a curb ramp there, a safe landing place, and that can't be in a driveway, so that complicated that location.
Okay, then.
Great idea. All right, next. Yes, ma'am. And then James, and then the gentleman who had his hand up in the back. And then Jean. and-
Sue Carp, I'm at 115 Madrone Avenue in Larkspur. And first off, I want to thank you guys for taking these public comments. It's a really important subject for me. I'm asking for reconsideration of the proposal to remove the Magnolia crosswalk. It's only one piece of the problem we have there. It is a major intersection. And I agree with you that these kids come around the corner on bikes. That's probably not going to change. Yesterday, coming from my house, there was a woman on a bicycle with a little girl on a bicycle behind her, and she didn't even stop at the corner of Madrone. She just went around the corner. I thought the minute we remove the crosswalk, bam, those cars are going to go right behind her.
Excuse me, could I ask you to just point on the map, ma'am? What crosswalk you're talking about?
Oh, I'm talking about right here, when they came down Madrone this way, she's going around the corner.
Where the green arrow is?
Pardon me?
Where the green arrow is?
Right.
Okay.
So she came down Madrone and turned south. Didn't stop, and I think the kids do that all the time. and she was in the street with this little girl behind her, so I just kind of went like this. Anyway, so that whole intersection is kind of a challenge, and to just address as a crosswalk, I think we need to take a little more into account there to make it safer. So to continue here, I've got, Madrone Crossing is not only a busy pedestrian crossing, but you've got runners, hikers, kids on bikes, scooters, skateboards, which I almost got hit at that corner the other day. But it's also the entrance to a really heavily used children's park. The corner of Madrone and Magnolia is also a major T intersection. And many of our residents are now using Onyx because they don't want to come out here and turn left going north. So during the commute hours and when school's in session, the school hours, is we're taking Onyx, and I'm finding enough traffic there that now I'm having to back down Onyx to let cars come down, because they're using it to go up and over. And, I mean, looking around and all these nodding heads, a lot of my friends are doing the same. The pedestrian crossing from Madrone to Madrone is very unsafe. And in both directions, if I'm on the south corner trying to cross, the people turning left, all the trucks coming in the canyon, don't see me. And if you're coming from the north corner into the crossing, the cars going south, and this is another area, if you remove that crosswalk, they're not even slowing down. So you've got a problem with this crosswalk here too, being unsafe.
I'm trying to keep up with your comments. Are you in favor of keeping the crosswalks at Madrone?
Yes, but I think that we need to treat it as a total intersection so that not only the Madrone crosswalk is safer, but this one going across this way is safer too. Because if you remove Madrone, cars are going really fast down there. If you remove the Madrone one, there's no reason for them to even slow down.
So you're saying keep all the crosswalks,
And make them safer.
but make them safer?
Yeah, and I know that budget is a problem. I thought stop signs would work maybe, but then you are gonna slow down traffic on Madrone. I mean, if you can't have a
Yeah.
light and we can't afford,
So you want all of them? You want Arch also?
you know, to be very honest, I don't use Williams as dangerous. People are coming around the corner here. And also, if you can't get into Perry's or something, coming around the corner here. The other thing they're doing here is they're making a U-turn. And Julian, I don't know if you've noticed the street, all the markings on the street, but they're coming down here. If there's a parking space here, people are just zooming around and making a U-turn. Really dangerous for this part from Madrone to Madrone, north to south, south to north. I've really thought this through. I've spent a lot of time at that
I
corner.
understand.
So also, all day long, people are crossing from the middle of the street to Perry's and from Perry's back to the middle of the street. They don't even use the crosswalks. And those crosswalks have kind of been neglected. So with removal of it, it seems like we're creating a more dangerous situation. I am aware of the fact that, you know, like a crosswalk, like California state law says, if you're at a corner, that is considered an intersection you can cross. And with the distracted drivers today, for instance, a couple days ago, I was standing at Ward Street. The light turned green. I've got my little dog. And I stepped out, and a car ran the red light. So we're kind of vulnerable wherever we're crossing, and I think pedestrians are going to have to take the responsibility for that and not cross until almost a car stops.
Okay.
So,
I want to make sure and give equal time now.
okay, I'll make it real fast. So my consideration is if we can't afford the cross lights, that we at least put stop signs in there. And with the start of summer, the traffic's much lighter right now. So if we're going to do any studies, it's not a great time to do it, but 10 weeks from now would be. So in closing, I'm just saying that the intersection's been neglected for years. There's never been a pedestrian crossing on either side of the street where the striping's been kept up. And I'm just asking a consideration be made that this whole intersection be safer, not just consider it a crosswalk.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you for your comments.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Let's see, who was next? James, and then the gentleman in the back, then Jean, and then this gentleman there. Okay. Hi, James.
Hi, James Holmes, Larkspur. I appreciate the council looking at this in detail. Sometimes, I know the council generally prefers broader policy issues, but sometimes these kinds of details actually have a more significant impact on people's day-to-day lives and some of the general policies. I honestly don't know what kind of a demand there is to maintain that crosswalk, but I suspect there probably is one. And I'm one of those who has lived through this cycle, and I have to say that, you know, from my standpoint, that crosswalk, Madrone crosswalk, may be redundant, and I well remember when it wasn't there. On the other hand, when it wasn't there, there was a lot less traffic, a lot less pedestrian traffic. The Lark Creek shops were much sleepier, in fact, gas station one time, and what is Perry's now is a private home. So it was generally quieter than it is now. There's a lot more pedestrian activity and therefore possibly a lot more demand for a crosswalk than there was in the days when it wasn't there. In any event, if indeed there is a demand for a crosswalk there, I would suggest that a very simple, cost-effective solution would be to keep the Madrone crosswalk, increase the safety by putting in the lights, and forego the changes, all the changes to the Arch Street crosswalk. Originally, the Madrone crosswalk and the proposal had two components. One was the lights, which I don't think anybody ever objected to, and the other was to narrow Madrone. The narrowing of Madrone was of great concern for safety reasons, for traffic maneuverability reasons, and for aesthetic reasons. We definitely don't want to do that. But why not just put the lights in and improve that crosswalk? Yes, it's a little bit long, but that really shouldn't be a major consideration because certainly it's not as long as the ones in Corte Madera, so it would very definitely be a step in the right direction. With regard to the Arch Street crosswalk, as I say, we're in a money-saving mode here. I honestly think we could forego those improvements if need be. And indeed, I think that crosswalk is visible and it works well. And indeed, the more I look at the proposal, the more concerned I get about its impact on traffic and the bus, because as a result of the proposed bulb outs. Because if you take a look at page 5 here, page 5 of your handout, and you look at those bulb outs, you will see that it will not be possible for a bus to stop and pick people up without blocking the traffic. It will not be able to pull over into the bus stop while traffic goes by. And so every time a bus comes and a bus stops, it's going to back up traffic, and that's going to be a particular problem. It's always going to be a problem, but it's going to be a particular problem in the morning when you have 5, 6 people getting on the bus, half asleep, and you've got commuter traffic. So I can actually see, I didn't mention this before, but I can actually see these bulb outs at the Madrone, at the Arch crosswalk actually causing problems rather than solving them. So essentially, the more I think of it, the more I think option 3, lights, no bulb outs at Madrone, lights only at Madrone, and leave the other crosswalk alone, and I think we will end up with better safety and less cost. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I make a comment?
City manager, please.
All three of the public speakers have framed part of their comments as there's some budgetary saving of money going on, and I want to make sure the historical narrative of this situation is correct and on the record. In 2015, we had a 9-year-old girl hit in the crosswalk in question. At that time, the community spoke up, asked the council to pursue a grant under the Safe Routes to Schools program to improve the crosswalk situation in this area to try to alleviate the condition that resulted in the young lady being hit. It's not an issue that the council said we won't spend money. We went and got a grant. The grant pays for one of these intersections, one of these crosswalks to be lighted up. That's what frames this discussion. It's not an issue of anybody's trying to be cheap. And I just want to make sure that's on the record.
Thank you for that clarification.
Can I ask Julian, the bulb out question, is that a raised bulb out that will influence bus pad traffic there?
No, we've worked, it is a raised bulb out, but we've worked with Marin Transit, and they are also proposing some improvements in those areas. So we've been in contact with them to make sure that our design won't impact their operations.
The bus service, okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you. My name is Peter Hubble, and I live in Madrone Canyon, and I really appreciate you guys looking into this matter. My niece was actually a victim of being hit in a crosswalk and nearly killed, so this is really near to my heart. My comment is really more on the West Baltimore intersection, because what I see is a lot of the kids, mine included, use that as a safe route to school or safe route and MPS, and they're taking their bikes across West Baltimore, and you've got a downhill slope coming into the city with no like slowdown. It's just basically a highway from the light up at Stefano's all the way into the city with nothing slowing them down. So I would like to see, to echo the comments that were made earlier, lights perhaps positioned up the slope and more police presence. I've called numerous times to have that West Baltimore intersection patrolled because I see cars blowing through that cross section. I see speeding all the time, and nothing seems to be done to make it safer. So I would like to see that flashing light brought up the slope a little bit, try to get cars and their momentum to slow down as they come into Larkspur.
Thank you for your comments.
Good evening, Jean Severinghouse, Greenbrae. I'm on the Safe Routes Task Force for Larkspur Corte Madera. And in fact, just exactly as the gentleman just described, we had a student member of the task force who specifically asked that we do something to make the cars stop at the crosswalks at Baltimore. And I realize that's not quite the ask here, but I think it's being suggested that they go instead to Williams, and I think it's a little bit less useful to them. So that would be another thing to think about, putting a flashing beacon. This is more money, I'm sure, but putting a flashing beacon at West Baltimore, where they are coming very fast down the hill. She said she's on her bike going to school, and they never stop for her in the crosswalk. So it's pretty terrifying. Also, I've been through the discussions with the consultant on all the different things they could do to the Madrone crosswalk, and none of them were very satisfactory. So putting a flashing light, putting what's called a pork chop island to separate the right turning cars, which are a big concern to me as well in the remaining crosswalk. I'm really glad to see the proposal to move the flashing light up to Arch and to put the bulb outs and to try to attract people to Arch, because it's way more visible. And if there was something at Arch with the flashing lights and something at Baltimore with the flashing lights, and paint the new paintings at Williams, I think it's all over a better project. But I still am really concerned about the crosswalk across the entrance to Madrone and cars coming fast and not stopping when they're turning. And it sounds like turning right out of Madrone is a problem. I don't know what the answer is to that, but thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Cindy, and then the gentleman over here.
I'm Cindy Winter, Greenbrae. I have a park amenity to suggest. Parks are for recreation. Get the kids around the corner turning right by putting a path across this acute angle here. Make it about 8 feet. The kids can use the path. They don't have to go on the road. Second suggestion, I think it's important to consider first the school children, the seniors, and the disabled. They're the most vulnerable in our community. And if Larkspur wants to become an age-friendly city under that UN program or whatever it is, I think we need to start thinking about those aspects. I don't live in the area, but I spent some time there because I wanted to observe the scene, because I knew that this investigation was going on. I was standing over on that side of Magnolia, and looking across the street in front of Frank's barber shop or near it, there was a small boy standing. He was quite a small boy, and he had a big bicycle, and he was standing in the shade under a redwood tree. He wanted to cross the street. School traffic was obstructing the roadway. The cars would not stop. He must have stood there for 5 minutes. So when I saw a break in the southbound traffic, I went out and I stood in the middle of the crosswalk. And then the northbound traffic stopped and he was able to scamper across. One problem with that road, as I see it, is that it has its elevation in the center is higher than on either side. And so if you are a small person, you're kind of obscured by the slope of the road. And I don't know the answer to this, but it's not a good situation, and an answer has to be found. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Gentleman on the side here. Who else would like to make comments this evening on this? Yes, sir.
I don't like doing this, so you might want to plug me here. I'm a little tall, but Mayor, council members, thanks for the opportunity to comment. This is the first time I've seen this, so I'm kind of diving in cold, but.
If you could identify yourself for the record,
Oh, I'm
please.
sorry, Peter Costa, 30 Diane Lane, down in Heather Gardens area. Been a resident for about 5 years now. So pedestrian risk is a function of the length of time you're in the street and the speed of the cars. And there's been some address with speed, and I think speed control is a huge factor. Even in the Heather Gardens, I've been working with Julian a little bit in the past on that, but that's another issue. But coming out of downtown, people are slowed down. I mean, it's downtown. Coming into downtown through this direction here, this is pretty much a blind intersection. It's pretty high speed, and I think the gentleman spoke to that before. And I haven't heard it yet, but the speed limit sign is after the crosswalks right now. It's not before before the crosswalk. So granted, if there's no stop sign or stoplight implementation, at a minimum, that signage should be well before that crosswalk at 25 miles per hour or even less. So that's just a recommendation I want to put in there if you want to add that in the scope. Thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you very much. Gentleman in the rear there. Are there any other people that would like to follow this gentleman to make comments or ask questions? All right, yes, sir. You'll be the last one, and we'll bring it back to the
Peter
council.
Mazanas, I'm a 44-year resident in Madrone Canyon. I want to thank Julian for his presentation. I thought it was very good. I'm in support of his option number 3, which is to leave the stop crosswalk at Madrone and add a light to it. You've got 500 houses back in there with probably close to bordering 1,000 children now that come out of the canyon. They've learned, and they're not going to unlearn, to go across at that intersection. To move them down to Arch, I think is wishful thinking. It's in the sunlight. It's very visible. The lack of sunlight here is what's causing the problem. I walked out of Frank's barber shop about 2 months ago, looked both ways, north and south, nobody coming from the south, one car from the north, walked out into the middle of the intersection, looked at the driver in the car coming from the north toward the south. He looked at me in the eye, I looked at him in the eye, he started to slow down, I walked in front of it, he never slowed down. I jumped out of the way, he slammed on his brakes, he then sped up and took off. The Corte Madera police officer at the scene, who was stopped there because they'd stopped somebody who had not stopped for a school bus, he said, well, the reality is he didn't hit you, so we can do nothing about it. I think somebody has to teach the cops how to read the vehicle code. But in support of this, I think a light here at this intersection is important. This one is in the sun. Down here, you've got all the complications from the people that didn't turn left to go into Curry's that are turning left down here. I do agree that down on Baltimore, is the other critical intersection that needs to be taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Thank you very much. Last call, other members of the public that would like to make comments or ask questions. If you could, if it's on a new information, please.
Barry Lee again. Hi. With respect to making money and the police presence or lack thereof, in San Rafael and San Francisco, there are lights with cameras. And I think it would be a great idea, and again, you could capture people's license plates and send them tickets, computer generated from the DMV. You could make money for this town. This town needs to slow down. And I really thank you for taking this very seriously. Thanks.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to close the public comment on this and bring it back to the City Council for discussion. Kevin, would you like to start?
I just want to express appreciation to Julian and working through. This is a challenging project for a variety of reasons. It's important to the public. It's important to the city. It's unfortunate that we are going to have fiscal constraints that we're going to have to deal with in implementing this project, but we've got what we've got, and I'm hopeful we'll be able to make progress in going forward with this. I just wanted to ask one question to the city manager in clarification in terms of what we're being asked to do tonight. Formal action is to approve the resolution to authorize you to enter into a contract. Are you also asking us for input on the different alternatives that are outlined at the end of the staff report?
Yes, because that will affect our negotiation with the contractor.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to get that clarified. Thanks.
Yes, we are seeking your direction with respect to the options that Julian's laid out, because it'll affect our negotiations with the contractor.
All right. Councilmember Way?
This has been a work in progress for a while, Julian, so thank you. We've had several comments and renditions of what we can possibly do at this very complicated intersection that has a lot of conflicting variables. So I appreciate that. I'm reflecting on the fact that over 50% of the budget of the city of Larkspur and the responsibility of the city council is to public safety. We spend over 50% of our budget on fire and police, and safety is a key issue that I think we have to be paying attention to in this. Convenience being one factor, but safety is the paramount factor for me in analyzing this. And looking at the staff report and hearing the public comment and hearing the presentation, it comes down to the fact that we have a very long intersection, a very long crossing of 3 crossing lanes with a right turn lane, which is automatically unsafe there. We have tree canopy, which we're not removing trees. We have tree canopy with very large trees causing a lot of shadowing. We have senior drivers in many parts of our community that have differential between light and dark as they enter and exit dark and light spaces, affecting their ability to see clearly. We have 3 lanes to go across there, which is an unusually long period of lane things. We do have speed. I appreciate the comments about needing to really look at the Baltimore Canyon, the Baltimore crossing also, and even further intersections, but we're looking at this one right now. I think we also have really difficult issues with the children at Dolliver Park who are really heavily used at Dolliver Park and then moving across into the shops and things across the street. So to me, the ideal would be to have possibly a stoplight or something, but we're not at that point right now. I like the staff's recommendation, which is to enhance the Arch Street crosswalk, to remove the Madrone crosswalk and redirect people, and to bring in a William crosswalk that's better enhanced. And I think overall we'll all get used to it, and there are plenty of places in which there are crosswalks removed for the betterment of the safety of the pedestrian, which is what we really which we really need to focus on in that area. So I'm in support of the staff recommendation, and thank you, Julian, for that.
Vice Mayor Morrison.
Nice list, Catherine. Julian, could you go to the one, the directory, oh, sorry. Can you go to the one that shows the different paths? Okay. So Catherine, I agree. I keep hearing the poor visibility, which is a huge concern for everyone. To me, walking 100 feet further to have a safe crosswalk is very important, and that's what we're all about, safety. Two questions, though. Could we reduce the speed limit at all going to downtown, Dan or Sky? Is that a big deal? It is? Julian, can we bring it down 20 miles per hour versus
So
20?
that would require, so the speed limits are, we were required to do an engineering traffic survey to set the speed limits, and so the speed limits that are set around town are in accordance with that practice. If we were to set it for anything different, we would not be able to issue tickets for violations on that street. So if it's set at 25, that's because the last survey that was done on that street indicated that 25 was the appropriate speed, and allows us to issue citations for people that are not obeying that speed, so.
It just seems like that's a huge problem, and maybe we could have more police force out there.
Just to add, and I'm not diminishing that there are speed issues, that accident I keep referring to, the traffic was moving 5 miles an hour.
Okay.
So there's really an issue here of visibility and
Sure.
awareness of drivers
Sure
that
is.
someone's entered the crosswalk.
Okay. And how about speed bumps? On West Baltimore, could we put in speed bumps down Magnolia, slow down traffic a little bit?
It's not an easy answer.
Okay, I'm just throwing that out, just to have that out there for maybe a future discussion. Okay, we'll leave it at that. So, so I agree with Catherine. I'd like to see the arch crosswalk improved. I do know that we can keep that, it was green, what was that called? Julian, the green?
So the green, I'll go back. to
Yeah,
that.
that's the one I'm looking for. So we can keep, I would keep that as is.
So the,
I understand, but at least it's still there.
Well, there's no marking there, that's just a,
I understand,
Okay.
but it's still there for those that want to take the chance. Versus the sign, we don't have to have the sign up saying Larkspur does not, no crossing, right? That's an option. Is that what I heard from you, Julian?
so what the sign would do is the sign would make that not a crosswalk, as opposed to without a sign, it's still technically a crosswalk, and it is legal to cross the street there, whether there's markings or not. And so at this intersection, if we were to move ahead with the staff recommendation, which is to remove the crosswalk, that would require the signs on both sides of where the long crosswalk is now. We're not proposing to make any changes to the short crosswalk that's on the south side, which is not currently posted as not a crosswalk.
Right, correct.
That's not part of the proposal. That hasn't, it's in the shadows, but it doesn't have the length, and so it was not, thought it was necessary to go to that step on that one, and we haven't had any concerns raised about that particular location.
Okay, great. So I also go through staff recommendation.
Councilmember Chu.
I think what we're facing here in large part is symptomatic of, what Larkspur has really turned into. And, being a resident here since, the early 80s, we have more cars here. I mean, I was just doing another study earlier and saw that there were 22% of our households now have 3 cars or more. So, that's part of the problem. You got congestion, you got more people, and you got a lot of people who just aren't adhering to basic courtesies or, speed laws. I think that's another discussion. I'm on the Central Marin Police Council. We can certainly have addressed that with, each neighborhood and the unique circumstances of, their situations. We just don't have that many patrol officers. Mike Norton's our police chief here. And, you focus on one intersection, nobody's going to do anything while there's a police officer sitting there. In the meantime, a dozen other intersections, end up having the same situation occur. So it's just all over the city. And, it's just really difficult. We need, as a collective community, to start thinking about, what our behaviors are. you know, to the person who said there should be more enforcement because of money, what, we make $10 a ticket? Can't, not even that. Okay, so anyway, as far as this intersection goes, you know, I have to agree with a couple of my other council members. You know, we don't have a perfect solution here, but we have to pick the safest one. And the staff recommendation at this point has indicated that moving it down to Arch is the safer of the two selections. And I would say at this point, the so-called inconveniences of what the staff report indicates as being 150 feet, and it's not even that because I've pasted off, is just not enough to warrant making something less safe when we have an obvious safer alternative.
All right. I just want to clarify a couple things. I asked the question of the Public Works Director if by improving the current Madrone crosswalk with the flashing lights, if we were improving the safety over the existing condition, and he said yes. So in terms of how much more safe or less safe, I think what we're after is more safe than the existing. I'm going to keep my comments brief. I'm going to align myself with several of the residents who identified themselves as longer-term residents of the area, as I would associate myself being one. I believe that the evolution of this has led to what I see as the most logical next step, which would be the alternative identified as alternative 3, which would be to add flashing lights to the Madrone crosswalk. It was added because people were crossing the street over time as a function of the increasing pedestrian activity in the area, as Mr. Holmes described over the years. It was added because people were going to do it anyway. So I think the next evolution of that would be to where this issue kind of dropped off before the pursuit of the grant. And not to say, we paid very close attention to the events that have taken place in this area and recognize that there's some incidents that got people's attention regarding the safety. But I myself believe that putting flashing lights at the Madrone crosswalk and not at the Arch Street crosswalk creates the most safe of the alternatives described, just because that's where the safety issue is the most pronounced. And people will cross there. It's just a function as whether it's going to be implied, a sign saying no, or we have a marking kind of telling people there, and we're going to try to make it as safe as possible.
And are you reaching that conclusion based on the pre-C safety analysis by an engineer or only by your own intuition?
Taking all the information into account, including my experience in the area over 30 years.
Okay.
So with that, I'll call for a motion.
Before that, I'd like to add one comment, Public Works Director. If we go with staff's recommendation, will you be removing both implied crosswalks and prohibiting crossing at Madrone at both points?
That is not the current proposal. The reason that we're proposing to put the signs up at the existing location is because it's a crossing location people are used to crossing at, and we want to reinforce that there is no crosswalk there because there was one and we're removing it. There was not, to my knowledge, a crosswalk ever at the other side, so I don't think there's an expectation or a history of there being a crosswalk there, so I don't think we need the signage to reinforce that there's no crosswalk or there's no guided crosswalk at that location. So the sign is only proposed where we're removing the crosswalk to reinforce that there's no longer a crosswalk there.
I would suggest removing both of them.
Of the implieds?
Of the implieds, otherwise it really doesn't make it safer. It'll go back to what Dan is suggesting, that people are going to use it anyway.
I'm not sure signs are going to stop it.
Yeah, they're going to use it. Oh, you can't fix stupid.
I also want to comment, I think that the public comment earlier regarding looking at the flashing lights at West Baltimore make a lot of sense.
Does.
So I know we don't have money and we're not really focusing on that tonight, but I want to make sure I put that in the record.
Yeah, you needed it at Alexander, too.
Well, I think addressing the accelerating traffic, I think, is a
I'm
valuable
going to move this
insight.
resolution, yeah.
All right, is there a motion?
I
Yeah.
can,
No,
do you want to make a motion? All right, I'll make the motion to pass resolution number 5418, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Larkspur conditionally awarding a construction contract for the Magnolia Madrone intersection improvements, Magnolia Avenue bicycle and pedestrian improvements for Post Street to Doherty Drive and a Doherty Drive at Redwood High School safe pathway projects, an amount not to exceed $580,000.
I'll second that.
Could I, before we move on the vote, I'd like to make sure we're clear on the consensus as to which direction.
I was going to ask you that.
Is there a consensus on the staff recommendation? Raise your
I'm
hands.
not in total agreement with the staff recommendation, the way it was just characterized.
Is there any consensus around alternative 3?
Well, can we, alternative 3 is just to improve the Madrone Crosswalk.
And the rest of the staff recommendation?
Okay, well,
And not the arch crosswalk.
that's not what the resolution says.
Does the resolution allow us to pick an alternative, Mr. City Manager?
So the project was bid to improve the Arch Street crosswalk and remove the Madrone crosswalk. So we would need specific direction from the council that rather than award as, if you approve the resolution, you're telling us to proceed with the bid when we negotiate with the contractor. If you want us to pick one of the other options and negotiate that option, we have the flexibility to do that, but we need that direction tonight from you.
I know you do.
Okay.
So that means moving the resolution as has occurred is essentially the staff recommendation you see up there on that
Right.
screen.
That's what I would like.
Right, so I just.
That's what I'm moving. Remove the Madrone
All right, now
Crosswalk
the-
and improve the arch.
I want to make sure the maker of the motion understands what,
Absolutely.
all right.
But
We have a motion for the staff recommendation, is that what it was?
that's correct.
Yes, and I second it. That's
there's
the
been a
staff
second.
recommendation up there.
Any further discussion? Any requests from the makers of the motion? All right. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Opposed.
Opposed? All right, it's 3-2.
So we're actually required on, when there's dissent, to note for the record that the dissenting votes were Mayor Hilmer and Councilmember Chu.
And my dissent, Councilmember Chu can speak for himself, has to do with my preference to go with alternative 3 as outlined in the staff report.
And for the record, my opposition is that unless you remove both crosswalks, I don't think we're making enough of an improvement in safety where we're offsetting it to the extent that moving it down to the Arch Street stairs will provide us with truly a net benefit.
Okay?
We also note the interest in other crosswalks, and we'll start to engage the relevant parties that might have grant monies for those.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for helping us with this evening. We'll move now we'll close that item and move on to our next business item, which is 8.3, a request to amend the restricted parking conditions in the Marina neighborhood. May we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Excuse me. I have a brief presentation for you, and then also want to note that I've asked several staff people to be available to you, including the police chief, Mike Norton, is here, as are other staff members familiar with the general issues that we'll be discussing this evening. For background and context for the council community, we received the request that's in your packet from the Homeowners Association, which is the Larkspur Marina Property Owners Association, which represents the Marina neighborhood, which is Riviera Circle and the related roads within the Marina neighborhood, to put a parking permit system through their whole neighborhood and restrict parking to residents only. That's certainly one of the options you'll be asked to give us direction on this evening. And as I go through the presentation, there are some other issues. To make sure the public was aware of this before the school year ended, we asked the schools to send a notice out that this discussion was occurring. And also, we put a notice on Nextdoor. We did encourage folks to wait and read the staff report. My impression is some of the comments that came in may not have read the staff report. So as I go through the presentation, there's a couple points I want to highlight that I think our notice, being a notice, couldn't really get to the nuance of. So with that, general location of what we're talking about is this is the Marina neighborhood. So I've got that circled for you. We've got the high school down here. And so we're focused on that part of Larkspur. We will be discussing some of the areas nearby as well. So how did we get to the circumstance that we are in today? The city's recognized for many years that there's a challenge and issue related to, Julian, do you think you'd take that outside? Thank you. The city's recognized for many years that there are some challenges for the neighborhood, the Marina neighborhood, in terms of its location relative to Redwood High School. And in fact, in 1975, the city council adopted an ordinance that amended our municipal code to create a section of the municipal code that addresses parking restrictions between the hours of 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., the school hours. And then in that section of the code, they specifically spoke to the Riviera Circle area or the Marina neighborhood. There's not a lot of notes back then. The minutes just say they passed this ordinance without discussion. I did find some references back in some notations about this that the League of Cities actually provided this code section to the city. Because I think there were many communities throughout the state wrestling with issues about conflict between high schools and schools in general and neighborhoods. And so I think this framework of restricting parking from the hours of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. actually came from something the league gave to the city. That seemed to work from what I'm learning from anecdotes from former staff members for a while. But as more and more students were driving to Redwood and the population in Redwood was changing, the problems began to crop up again. The 1975 ordinance only spoke to restricting parking for 2 hours around the entrances to the neighborhood. There's 2 entrances to the Marina neighborhood, and didn't speak to anything else going on in the neighborhood. So in the 1990s, the residents began engaging the city and the school about growing concerns around issues of health and safety. And I think, to my comment earlier, I think folks who didn't have an opportunity to read our staff report have focused heavily on this as an issue of one neighborhood saying they don't want certain people to park in their neighborhood. The city, I don't think in its history, including this staff, would ever entertain a request solely on the basis of not allowing the public to park on public streets. The issue, as I understand it, in the 90s was framed under an issue of health and safety. And specifically, there were pedestrian safety issues occurring both in the neighborhood and as students crossed Dougherty, often jaywalking through traffic because they were anxious to get to class. That was a big concern with the police department in particular back then. There were also documented incidents of reckless driving on the residential streets within the neighborhoods that particularly were students who were driving in a hurry to park somewhere in the neighborhood to get to the school. I've had several people say to me, speeding's a problem in other neighborhoods and you don't restrict it there. We have actually had, on a number of occasions, some of the council members have participated in speed studies within their neighborhoods. Those are almost always residents of the neighborhood who are guilty of the speeding when we do that. And it's amazing how often once we point that out, the requests to do something go away. One thing I want folks to keep in mind as we have a discussion today is I've had people say to me, well, these folks knew what they were doing. They bought a house by a high school. Okay, I often have discussed that in terms of when people tell me the football stadium makes too much noise or the class bells go off or something like that. But I don't think anyone in the city, no matter where they picked a residence, envisions that a use nearby their neighborhood produces reckless driving within their neighborhood by folks who don't live in their neighborhood. And that's, I think, was a big concern both for the residents and for the police in the 90s when they were looking at this issue. The last challenge it was littering and loitering. I spoke to the public works director from this period who told me it was common for the kids to hang out at lunchtime around their cars, and in particular to jump in their car, race off to get food, race back, and then eat it as a group around their car before they went to school. And so there was a problem that there was a lot of littering and loitering going around during the lunch hour in the neighborhood. So these were actually the issues that were concerning the staff when they were engaging the neighborhood and concerning the property owner association in the 90s. From these discussions, there was an administrative decision to create 20-minute parking in the Marina neighborhood. How that happened, I've heard a lot of different stories about, and I'm just going to say they're probably all true or probably all partially true. What I can tell you is there's 20-minute parking in part of the neighborhood. And as part of these discussions, the Twin City Police Authority, which is the predecessor to our current Central Marin Police Authority, agreed that they would do a permit program for the residents so that they wouldn't get ticketed if the police came out to enforce the 20-minute parking. I want to note here that historically and to this day, in residential areas, we don't patrol for parking enforcement type issues. So the city and the police weren't agreeing that they would start doing regular patrols in the neighborhood to enforce this. It's an as called by a resident basis. So enforcement of these rules requires somebody to call and tell the police there's a violation of the rule occurring, which does happen from time to time. So what does this look like today in our current condition? First, I went out this morning and took a few quick shots to show you the signage that's out there. It's a little confusing. You can't see it as well, but in the upper left corner is what most of the signs look like because they were the signs erected in the 90s. And they say 20-minute parking and have the restrictions cited. The one to the upper right was one of the original 2-hour signs that was modified to be a 20-minute sign, and they did a pretty good job on that one, so it still looks like a 20-minute sign today. And then the sign on the bottom is I think an original 2-hour sign that got modified poorly to a 20-minute sign, and I can't really tell you that anybody who parks next to it could figure out exactly what it's telling them to do today. So we have all these signs sort of strewn out in part of the neighborhood, and they're all actually on private property just behind the sidewalks. And that was the arrangement that the city and those property owners made. This map shows the actual signage. I was pleased to find out that Public Works actually has GIS data of where all our signs are. So I had them print this up. You have to kind of look in here, but here's one concentration of signs. This is at the eastern entrance to the neighborhood. So the purple dots are all signs. Over here is a concentration of signs at the neighborhood's western entrance. Those continue on along here, and we have a few strewn up here. We do not have any signs in the deeper parts of the neighborhood. That raises some questions. Where exactly is there 20-minute parking? Where is there not 20-minute parking? Note that here on Villa Brisa, which is the through street here, it stops here and it stops here. So we've got a zone in here with no signage. So where is there 20-minute parking and where is there not 20-minute parking? I confirmed with the police today that they only enforce 20-minute parking in and around the signs because that's defensible for them. And they're issuing a citation under their authority to cite someone for violating a public sign, direction from a public sign. What does enforcement actually look like in the Marina? I had folks ask me how often is this actually occurring. The chief was kind enough to run a report to see what happened in the last 12 months. There were 35 calls in the last 12 months for an officer to come out and check what's going on in the Marina neighborhood. And those 35 calls produced 139 citations for violating the 20-minute parking. Now, the question, actually before I go back, the question I keep getting asked is, if you broaden this to the whole neighborhood, and we've got kids parking in the neighborhood, where are they going to go? And the first answer I give you is they won't go to the school parking lots because they're completely full. And nothing I've heard in talking to the schools gives me any hope that that's going to change anytime soon. So where might they go? And I think you probably have folks here today with valid concerns that it's just going to put more pressure for the kids to park in their neighborhood. So this is William Avenue. This is a Google Maps shot from May, in a day in May. I think we can speculate and be probably correct that these are mostly, if not all, students parking along the south side of William. I actually took my little cursor and went around William Avenue, and it sort of confirmed what I generally have observed in my time working here. Depending on how much demand there is for parking, this whole strip all the way down to Magnolia can sometimes be occupied, well, not Magnolia, but to the Monte Vista neighborhood can be completely occupied if there's a high demand. Some of that's not students when that's all taken up, but you don't observe as many cars yet entering into the rest of the residential streets. You might if we put more pressure on students to find parking somewhere. This is not in Larkspur, this is Apache and Birch. Those who are familiar with the Sandra Marker Trails berm that's right at the edge of the school property know that occasionally students do park in Corte Madera and go over that berm. We could anticipate that we might put more pressure on students to park in that neighborhood. So we did make sure Corte Madera knew we were talking about this. Same police department, so the chief maybe can speak for everybody from a government standpoint. I think I would not be surprised if someone's here from Rose Lane and might be concerned about folks parking in Rose Lane. Those streets are pretty narrow and there's limited parking in there to begin with. So if students start taking up those spots, I think we'd hear from this neighborhood. I want to acknowledge Piper Park. We know anecdotally that Temescal students park in Piper Park, but it hasn't been enough that we get complaints about their use of the park. We could anticipate some students deciding they might want to park in Piper Park, although you've heard me on other projects say people like to walk the shortest distance possible. I ran out of time, or I could have put Lucky Drive, and I think even had a comment from someone about he'd actually prefer students to what he already has to deal with on Lucky Drive, but I think you could see students heading in that direction as well. I focused heavily here on public assets. You could also anticipate students might start taking the risk of parking on some of the private parking lots and seeing if they can get away with that. One of the things we've raised in the staff report is this discussion in many respects is broader than the Marina neighborhood from a council perspective, because what about other neighborhoods? Now, I've identified the ones that might come to you and say we want protection from Redwood students too, but there are other neighborhoods in the city that have their own concerns. In Greenbrae, in unincorporated Greenbrae, they actually do have some restricted permit parking systems in place. The county does allow for some of that. The city actually does have one section of Villa Cumbre where we have 2-hour parking. We've rarely had to enforce it, but we do have, I think it was 4 when I checked, 4 2-hour parking signs at the bottom of Villa Cumbre within the city. The purpose of those signs were to discourage commuters from parking and then walking to get on the bus or walking to get to the ferry, doing something to get on public transit and leave their car in the Greenbrae neighborhood. There's also a sign. I have not been able to track down the genesis of this sign, but there's a 4-hour parking sign at the on Dartmouth at the entrance to Hillview that I think is probably related to the Hillview Greenway, which is technically a park, but I'm not 100% sure, and I don't know what the genesis of, and the sign's actually in front of somebody's house. So we're still researching that one. All the other signs I looked up in the city, I think were put into place because there are other neighborhood signs with parking restrictions, but I think they were all put in place due to narrow streets and other concerns about sightlines and weren't put in place because of concerns to curb behavior. But you could see these neighborhoods come forward. You could also imagine that neighborhoods we haven't heard from yet that have difficulties, say, with the hospital, although they're building all that wonderful parking, so maybe they won't be quite the impact that they used to be. So I think for you, this conversation has both the question of the request from the Marina neighborhood, but the broader question of, do you want to open this up? So to that end, we provided you with an example from Nevada of how they have put into place an ordinance that empowers the council to consider neighborhood requests for different types of parking restrictions. And rather than having to keep amending the municipal code every time they want to put restrictions in place, the restrictions are captured in resolutions specific to the conditions for individual neighborhoods, and the code empowers the council to do it in that approach. So that might be a one way down the road. As you give us direction, you might want to explore that if you're opening the door to what about other neighborhoods.
I have a question for you regarding organizing and providing the city with a mechanism that can adapt and be sustainable with respect to these issues, because I don't see the issues reducing over time. I see these issues have become more apparent over time, and I don't expect they'll become less apparent.
Behavior or the
Just the issue itself, you know, the competition for parking. Because it not only affects residential neighborhoods, it's been something affecting our commercial districts as well. So my question to you and the council, is this not an opportunity, given the timing, for us to start talking about what mechanisms are at our disposal, such as parking districts, to create rules, organizational structures, funding mechanisms, so that we can create the programs that we need and make sure they're sustainable. Not that we just start rewriting ordinances and not knowing what the resources needed are to put these in place and keep them enforced and all the things, because we know enforcement is a challenge. So we need to create resources to, if this is what's expected. So I just want to put that out there as we move the conversation forward, and we might give ourselves adequate time to think about the larger issue.
And you would imagine, so it's looking at it more in a global context rather than specific to this neighborhood. You're thinking of a broader parking plan? 'Cause I don't understand exactly.
What are our needs going to be, and what will we need to make sure that we can implement what we decide to do? It's going to take people, resources, time to lay out a policy that makes sense for all the neighborhoods, not just the ones that are telling us they're having a problem.
Okay.
So I think the downtown fits into this as well. And if this allows us to create an organizational structure for all of these things, we should think about that up front. All right. Any further staff information?
I had a little bit more, and then
All right.
I'll wrap up. I wanted to frame for you what we specifically are hoping to get some direction from you this evening. We purposely wrote this as a discussion and direction item to empower you to take the conversation as you see appropriate, but we have some specific desires that we would like in terms of direction. You know, from time to time, we do make administrative decisions about health and safety, and typically we go back at some point and codify when we've turned what staff had to implement to solve an issue at a point in time into something more permanent. I can't explain why that didn't happen here. So at a minimum, I'm hoping the direction will result tonight in giving staff where you want us to go to reconcile the problem we have that the code says one thing, and then there was a health and safety concern that resulted in something else being put in place. To that end, one of the options we see is that you revise the municipal code and you continue to focus specifically on the Marina neighborhood as the code does now. And that you need to then decide about the issue of whether you think the request that it be resident only on the streets is appropriate, or if you, an alternative that staff sees as viable would be to do the 20-minute zone throughout the entire neighborhood. As I understand it, the 20-minute was chosen because that was a time period that existed elsewhere in the city when they put the signs in the commercial districts. We had 20-minute parking, and they needed a time that was shorter than a class because they needed to make sure that the students were sufficiently deterred because they ran the risk that they would be penalized. And it's not as viable a deterrent if they had the opportunity to run out and move the car. So that was why, talking to former staff members, they settled on this shorter time period. But we do agree in this, and note in our staff report, the convoluted sort of here we have a sign, there we have a sign is not, it's not fair to the public. It's very difficult on the staff to interpret. So I think a uniform policy for the neighborhood is appropriate. And then secondly, as I was alluding to, you could elect here that the municipal code should empower you to create parking districts, and then you're going to do that by resolution. And if you want to go to that approach, we would bring you something about the marina at that time. So I still would want some direction about the permit only versus the 20-minute with respect to the marina neighborhood, because I'd write a resolution to fit your direction. I don't discount, though, that you could decide that for the time being you want the municipal code to simply recognize what's in place, and we can do that as either a short-term solution or a long-term solution. As I've said, staff really thinks we should get this confusion of where these parking zones are out of the way and alleviate it by doing something neighborhood-wide in the Marina District. As I understand it, speaking with the chief and in reading the vehicle code myself, you define a parking zone by having 2 points, point A and point B, and saying everything in between it is the restricted zone area. This neighborhood's unique because we can do that by putting signs at each of the 2 ingress-egress points, and that would actually meet the requirements of the law. So that's actually where, that was a staff feedback to the Property Owners Association that resulted in that being enumerated on their request, was because we had suggested that was a nice, simple, clean, and relatively inexpensive way to meet the vehicle code. We certainly can go signing through the neighborhood, but I think something simple and clean sometimes is the easiest way. Also, I'm not 100% clear why the signs are on the resident's property, but that's not typical for what we do. So, and raises issues if we ever go to maintain the signs and we were to damage private property when we were doing so. So, I'd really rather not go through the whole neighborhood putting more signs on private property.
Did you comment earlier, I'm sorry if I didn't hear this, that property owners requested signs?
So I understand it, there was some sort of dialogue between the Public Works Department and the property owners about, is it okay, would you like us to put a sign on your property? So there was some sort of either, I haven't found written agreements, I think there was some sort of verbal agreement. I'm not sure, I'm just not sure why they went that route, and I just don't have the historical background to provide you with that information. I'd probably, as your risk manager, just prefer signage points at the 2 entryways that are on our public property. I think that would be cleaner. So those are some of the direction, that's some of the direction we require from you this evening, or hoping to get from you this evening. I now turn it over to you for discussion and
All right.
questions.
Questions of the city manager and his report. Vice Mayor Morrison.
Dan, are you saying if we leave the 20-minute signs up, and we'll put more throughout the park, throughout the neighborhood, that we can ask the police to enforce it for the first month or two, just to ticket, just to have it a routine, a daily routine, if not twice, just to get the point across?
You're asking, could we proactively enforce the signs? We can.
For a month or two, just to let them know that we're taking this seriously.
We can certainly do that. From time to time, we do proactively do operations like that. We have always, as a general rule in Larkspur, done a lot of this type of enforcement, both police enforcement of what's essentially code enforcement, and then planning and public works code enforcement. We've typically done that on a complaint-based business, complaint-based basis. So it certainly would be different from what we normally do, but it doesn't mean we couldn't do it.
Make the point across. And then Dan, I'm sorry, one more question. So I think Redwood has to take some responsibility with this problem too. So you did mention that Redwood's not going to change. You mentioned something about Redwood. So I used to own the Safe Routes to School, and they can have a database, which they're not promoting. And this database can tell the kids, this is the neighborhood that you all live in, you should start carpooling. And that is a feasible applicant that they can use, but they're not, they decided not to do that. And Uber pooling, are they promoting carpooling as much as and we hope they should be?
I'm not in a position to make that sort of subjective judgment about whether they're doing enough. I got some data today. Shannon O'Hare was kind enough to do some research for me and contact the schools for me to make sure I understood. I guess in the last school year, they issued more than 700 parking permits. They only have available to students 300 some odd parking permits. Now, admittedly, just so I'm clear, everyone's clear, if your child got a permit for his or her car, your car, and your spouse's car, that's 3 permits for one student. So we didn't ask them to dig into that data and figure out how many households have permits.
Okay. I think we need to get a little more
But there's a
aggressive
lot of
with Redwood.
permits. What that tells me is even if several of the households have 2 or 3 permits, there's a lot of permits floating out there. My understanding from talking to folks is that lot's full pretty darn quick every day. And then if you didn't make it in the lot, go find parking.
All right, thanks.
Councilmember Chu and then Councilmember Way.
Yeah, actually, along that line, my question's actually maybe for the chief or the city manager. You know, a situation like this, as you've pointed out, we've always done things on a complaint-driven basis. So I think it's real difficult for homeowners to be calling the police literally every day. And when you have a 20-minute limit, it would almost suggest that you basically have somebody who's going through the neighborhood all day long to properly enforce it. You know, I mean, are we prepared to do something like that? Otherwise, it really doesn't do anything, because students, being what they are, just going to ignore it and see how many tickets pile up that their parents can pay for.
I don't have an answer to that. Yes, I do think that Larkspur's changed, Corte Madeira's changed, Ross has changed, Tiburon's changed, Kentfield has changed, and there may be families, more and more families with the means to pay numerous tickets, and they may view that as the cost of empowering their children to park, but I don't know how to change that social behavior.
Yeah, see, so it's less about the social behavior. Now it becomes, if we really want to achieve what we want to for the neighborhood, it would almost require constant enforcement.
Gentlemen, could I ask Chief Norton to weigh in here?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing. So we have done it on a complaint basis. When you look at the calls and how many weeks school's actually in session, it averages to once a week. We're going out there and we're averaging 4 or 5 tickets. In terms of the permitting process, just so you know, over the last 5 years, roughly 50 vehicles have, those could be 50 residents or it could be 50 vehicles and 20 residents, I'm not sure, have actually gotten the residential permit with us, so they're able to park there and not get cited.
This is in the Marine.
Yes. I went out there, just so you know, on Monday. I went out and I drove back 30 minutes later, and there was approximately 40 vehicles in there. I did not get out and look at who had permits and who didn't, but school was not in session, so it looked like there was a lot of landscaping and construction and things like that going on. I just wanted to throw that out there. You know, so if we do proactively, we are going to be getting residents. We are going to be getting a lot of people who work out there in addition to the students. And we can't, I think it's kind of odd for us to go out and just hit when students are there if we're going to be proactive and not go out in the summer at all, because we should be being objective and equally enforcing the law. One thing I did want to point out too is last year we wrote over 500 tickets in the Redwood lots for blocking of fire lanes and things like that, where they called us and requested it. So in terms of being proactive and doing a lot of parking enforcement, you're looking at roughly 700 parking citations for that. That outweighs by far how much downtown enforcement we did anywhere else in your town. Your major parking issue is right now Via La Brisa, Riviera, and the 2 Redwood lots, because you know, fire lane blockage and things are very serious around a school, obviously. So, and you know, I can get into staffing if we want, but you know, on an average day, we have one person on payroll doing nothing but parking, but that's for all 3 jurisdictions, including downtown San Anselmo, which is very demanding. Some days we do have 2, but otherwise, the reason we do complain only is otherwise if we proactively are doing it, we're going to be using police officers to go out and do parking enforcement. And as you heard, and this isn't unique to Baltimore or Magnolia, everywhere in town, every neighborhood says they want more, they have speeding problems, stop sign, we want more officers. And we have maybe 1.5 that can work on a day in Larkspur for all these issues. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, thanks.
Chief, do you have a public safety officer at Redwood anymore?
We do. They're,
Part-time or full-time?
Right now, it's part-time, basically, and sometimes we have to pull them back to patrol when staffing gets shortage just to handle all our other calls for service we have. And just for the public here so they know, we average in our 3 towns 40,000 calls for service a year. We have 42 officers, but really only 32 are scheduled to be patrol officers and work the street. The rest are detectives, school resource officers, traffic when we're up to staffing. And it's not unique to us, it's just a public safety issue. And that's why really you're not gonna see really hardcore daily parking enforcement like a San Francisco or a San Rafael unless you have like a standalone parking that has high citation numbers, has meters all over that cost a lot of money. There's a lot of drawbacks to that too that I'm not sure the communities really want, that level of parking enforcement.
It's called a parking district.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier.
Well, I mean, you brought up a good point because the demand for parking has changed in this community. You have more home businesses. The affluence has created and generated more traffic to the home, especially with e-commerce. And you have fewer people actually using their garage for parking.
That's
So
true.
it's using the on-street parking. So we're trying to balance this out is what I'm getting at.
I think just some other things to bear in mind too is talking to Redwood High School. You know, when it was kind of a dip, I think at one point they had maybe 1,200 or 1,400 students now. This last year they had 1,900. They're scheduled to go up 200 more in the next couple of years. We also, I noticed, whatever it was, about 10 years ago, the vehicle code changed. And once you turn 16, in the old days when I turned 16, the first thing I did is I carpooled with all my friends. You can't do that legally anymore for the first 6 months. So for your sophomores, they're all single riders because they can't take anybody, unless it's a sibling. And just one final thing is Doherty's great now. It's safe. It's above the flood zone and all that. In the old days, it was unsafe, but kids did used to park all the way from the school all the way down to the police station. There's a lot of parking spots. It was really dangerous, and you know, honestly, that's not a solution because kids were getting hit. But it's just you've seen the cars and the student body go up and up and up, and the parking decrease and decrease, and it's just made a mess out there.
And added to that are the students who live at a distance where mobility issues are.
Yeah, Redwood, I
Significant.
think, if I'm not mistaken, that Redwood serves basically, there's Tiburon residents, there's Ross residents, and there's everyone in between.
Hey, Mike, I thought if a child 16 is carpooling, you can have permission from the parents if it's a neighborhood type of carpool. I thought that was allowed.
I don't think so. I think it's only
Science.
siblings.
Only siblings? Oh, I thought, okay,
All
thanks.
right. Councilmember Wade, do you have additional questions?
No, I'm interested in hearing from
All
everyone.
right. Councilmember Hara, do you have questions? Staff?
Yeah, just real quick. And it's about the Novato permit system that you've included in the staff package, which seems to me to be an attractive way to go. I think it's appropriate for us to have a mechanism in place to address the parking concerns of neighborhoods throughout the community, and that's a way to do that. But I have two questions. One is under a permit system like the one that Novato has adopted. Well, first of all, first question is, do you have any feedback or sense from folks in Larkspur city government about how well that permit system has actually worked to the satisfaction of the residents?
I haven't had a chance to have that dialogue yet with the staff in Novato.
It would be helpful and of interest to get some feedback from them about that, but if we're going to go down that route, which I think is attractive in many respects. The other question is a practical question. Under any kind of a permit system, how do you deal with, and this has already came up in the presentation, how do you deal with kind of transient commercial vehicles, landscapers, plumbers, things like that, babysitters?
So I think the way we've envisioned this is that because it's complaint-driven, a lot of times a year we're not going to get a complaint, but I suspect if I were to have the chief to dive deeper into those citations from time to time, they've had to ding a landscaper, a babysitter, or someone else who's not aware and out on the street when they have gotten a complaint about the cars. And I'm not sure there's a great way around that other than to issue some sort of permit that a homeowner can put on a car. I can only tell you now from personal experience because I've lived in these districts in much earlier part of my life, and that is a typical practice, is to issue, you can have a permit to give to somebody, a guest or a service
And
provider.
it'd still be the same as a residential permit, it's just that
It's tied to the homeowner, so they're responsible for that permit and any behavior that's tied to it, yeah.
okay. I mean, I would imagine that from an enforcement perspective, it's probably not that big of a deal when you're dealing with landscapers and other commercial, where they've got signs on their vehicles that indicate that that's what they're doing. But for folks who are like a babysitter, we have somebody across the street who has a babysitter there every day, drives a car, you wouldn't be able to distinguish that from the owner's cars, so.
Right. I also should note, the chief and I talked quite a bit about this whole issue today, and he overall, I think, would prefer to retain the permit issuing process in his agency, just to make sure that it's done without any controversy, which, it's not, we looked at it, it's not as huge an administrative concern as I thought it might be, so.
Okay, and just one last question, just so I understand it, the Marina POA request is not to retain the 20-minute signage.
So one of their suggestions is that's not working. That's still not enough of a deterrent, and that it needs to go to permit-only parking to truly be a deterrent.
Okay, and drop the 20-minute signage.
Yeah, now that does raise a question, because these are public streets, about whether you want to completely eliminate the ability of someone separate and apart from this issue involving the behavior of these particular subset of drivers from being able to drive into the neighborhood, park for any period of time, because it is a public street. So that's one reason staff suggested you may want to simply make the 20-minute parking, and recognizing that may not be as perfect a deterrent, and it may require us to come out twice to deal with enforcement. That still might overall be a more attractive outcome when you're thinking about these public assets.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Other council member questions of staff? Staff report completed?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
All right, are there members of the public that would like to make comments or ask questions on this agenda item? Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your patience.
I'm Patricia Steele. I live on Riviera Circle. Dan and I have been talking about this issue for quite some time, and so there's a couple things I think that I think he and I don't agree on, so I need to point those out. First of all, as I understand it, there's two issues that he's proposing to you tonight. One is this larger issue of do you want to consider parking administration in other areas, and do we want to adopt the Novato thing, and that, so I see that as one issue. Our issue, the request that we made, is a very simple and straightforward issue. We have always had permit parking. We are not requesting permit parking. We have always had permit parking. It's in the 20-minute zones. We can go to the police station, get a permit. I have one. I almost brought it with me, but we have permit parking. So the reason we got that permit parking, I think, as Dan accurately pointed out, is because we're in a unique situation. We're very close to the school. Kids were parking in there. I did a little asking with neighbors, and when it went to 20 minutes is because someone was hit by a school kid speeding through, rushing to get to lunch or whatever, and someone got hit. So they came to the council and said, look, we need to get some relief here. They decided on the 20 minutes. They've lowered it to 20 minutes. Still permit parking. All neighbors had residential parking stickers or permits, and so they did that. They went to different neighbors and said, do you want a sign? Is it a problem at your house? And people got signs. That's why there's signs on the neighbor's property, and that's why there aren't signs everywhere, because some people who lived farther in the neighborhood felt like, I don't need a sign. So that's why there are only signs in certain places. Over the years, it's gotten much, much worse because the school's increased in size. They give unlimited, I went and spoke to the principal, they give unlimited parking permits. Anyone who wants one gets one, even though they know that there's not enough spots. They also don't have a closed campus, so all the kids like to go out for lunch. So at lunchtime in our neighborhood, you've got people rushing back. The kids are new drivers. It's very dangerous. So essentially what we have been doing is calling the police to have them come ticket the kids who are parked under the no parking signs. But it's difficult for the kids because they're like, well, why can't I park over there and I can't park here? And the police have told us they would prefer not to have to come twice. So all we've asked is to make it uniform, put it in, make it clear that it applies to the whole neighborhood, and instead of making it 20 minutes, which requires the police to come back and forth, make it 0 minutes, so that if someone's parked there and they don't have a residential parking sticker, they get a ticket. And everybody knows it's the whole neighborhood. Everybody knows you don't have to have the cops come back and forth. And that's really all we've asked for. So we're not asking for permit parking. We have permit parking. We're just asking that the enforcement of the permit parking be made more clear and more easier for the police to administer. So, people will get permits. We have agreed to, we said we would take on printing the permits, the cost of the permits. The idea would be people would get 2 resident permits and a guest permit. If people needed extras because they had more car, they would do that. But if it goes to the police station, that works too. So if there's any questions. Yeah.
Do we want okay, go ahead.
Yeah, you seem to be working with the city manager, so I'm assuming you're more of a quasi-representative of the neighborhood on this. I go down the Redwood for meetings, and I can't park anywhere, but I know I'm just going to be there an hour, so I take my chances on the 20 minutes. Okay, would you be amenable to the school issuing a visitor, say a 1-hour parking permit that's dated?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
because
it's not that we don't want people to park in their neighborhood, and somebody made the comment like, oh, you knew what you were getting into when you moved into that neighborhood. We moved into that neighborhood, and I worried about the parking, and I saw the signs and said, oh, I'll buy a house here because there's parking signs that are making sure that this doesn't run over. So it's not that we don't want people parking there, it's just that it has to be controlled in some way. That's a great idea.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
So I have one question. So almost every home in the Marina has a 2-car garage and a 2-car parking pad in front of their garage. Is that correct?
Well, not the parking pads. The problem with the parking pads is that cars tend to go out into the sidewalk. So if you park in your driveway.
And you can't block a sidewalk.
You can't block the sidewalk.
That was just it. Thanks.
Other questions? All right, thank you. Appreciate it. Yes, sir. How many people would like to make comments or ask questions on this item tonight? All right. We're going to try to keep your comments to 3 minutes, please.
Again, Peter Costa, resident of Heather Gardens neighborhood, and I live actually directly behind San Andreas and Redwood, so we're talking 2 high schools right there, right? This is the, and we've kind of seen it, this is the image on William. I took this last week or right before school ended. This is Diane Lane. There's no sidewalks. There's a bicyclist here in the middle. Riviera Marina area has sidewalks. So in accordance with Larkspur Municipal Code 1856, off-street parking and loading, 4 points. One is to provide adequate parking, promote the safety of pedestrians, the ease of ingress and egress of motor vehicles traveling throughout, and also enhancing the visual qualities, right? You don't want to see parked cars like this throughout the whole day. So I just want to stress that Larkspur Marina is a problem. But once we mitigate something there, we're going to pinch that, and the problem is going to transfer to our neighborhood, because ours is the closest, and Rose Lane. So whatever decision's made, we got to make it holistically for all neighborhoods, or else we're going to be back again next year after this is, if whatever's implemented. So I just want to, that's my recommendation, is to look at all the neighborhoods. And I know Larkspur Marina, you know, they've voiced the loudest right now, but I think Heather Gardens needs to voice their, we don't have an association, but, you know, I need to voice that we have that problem right now, and it's going to get worse moving forward. So that would just be my ask, just to consider the streets around the Heather Gardens neighborhood and really take that in full consideration. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Who's next? Don't be shy.
Deep Johar. I live right at the corner.
Could you repeat that in the microphone, please?
Deep Johar.
Thank you.
I've been in the neighborhood for about a year now. I live right at the corner of a 20-minute zone and a unmarked zone. And I could tell you, and I'm right at the entrance to the neighborhood, closer to, I feel, the larger part of the parking lot. So every morning I see students flying in and at not normal speeds. And when you get to the end of the entranceway, which is about 2 houses in length, and then it's the circle. So you could take a left or a right. There's no stop, and people go flying around there. I'm not surprised someone's gotten hit in the past. It was before I got there, but I see it happen all the time. In fact, my wife called and complained because the construction workers who are working there also do this. They fly in, they fly out. I have 2 young children. I work all day, my wife works all day. We're not home, and we worry because our children are young, and if our nanny's bringing the kids in and out, these are cars going in fast. These are not residents, though I will say probably some residents do it too. I'm not going to defend that. But people go in here. So limiting traffic is important for safety. That's one comment. And then the other thing is about how those 20-minute zones are distributed. Noticeably, where there's a lack of that signage, there's more of those students parking. So deeper in the, they just are going deeper in the neighborhood. So it's a uniformity issue, I think. So that's part of my comment. The other thing is, going back to the last thing we were discussing about public safety at crossings. These students are also then crossing busy Doherty to get to their school. They're not going to the crosswalk. They're late. They're running across the street with traffic both ways having to stop. And like I said, I'm at the front of the neighborhood, so I see this, you know, every morning. And when I have to leave, I have to watch for these kids. It's usually around that 8 o'clock time. So I get that there's the issue of looking at all the neighborhoods, but I think part of it is also the safety because of the flow of traffic. Right now, they're constructing some walkways, but there's no stop signs with those walkways in that entrance. I don't know if you guys know about that. You probably do, but they're repaving and putting walkways now. In fact, there's a hole in my front yard, so any of my neighbors probably know they've taken out half my landscaping on one corner because they're putting that in. And I'm okay with that because it's going to be safer. So just a safety issue with that.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, sir. Then the gentleman in the back.
My name's Lauren Stan. I'm a recently elected board member for the Larkspur Marina HOA. And we fully support, as the board, the permit process that Patricia was discussing. We also are offering to organize a committee to make sure that permit process is fair to all our neighbors and that we take input from them so that we can orchestrate that process well and in conjunction with the city. Also, I want to mention that what the gentleman was just discussing, I live on Villa La Brisa also, so I see this every day. There's more and more young children, families moving into the neighborhood, so traffic safety issues are becoming more and more important, especially as Villa La Brisa has become a cut-through for traffic on Doherty, both in the morning as well as afternoon commute hours. So it's not just Redwood High School students that are causing the traffic, it's residents trying to avoid traffic on Doherty. But I don't want to confuse the topics here tonight, but I do want a lot of people to know that we, as a board, had a very good meeting with Julian Skinner a few weeks ago to discuss different traffic solutions for Villa La Brisa and speeding. He was incredibly informative and helpful, and we are exploring multiple different solutions with him, and we think there's some things we can do short-term, and then there's some other long-term solutions that were possibly viable once we get the traffic studies completed. But so we do support the permit process. We think it should be throughout the whole neighborhood, and we will help orchestrate implementation of that process.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, sir. Good evening.
Good evening. Hi, I'm David Hill. I've lived with my wife Laura on Monte Vista for over 30 years. And I would say, first of all, we're extremely lucky that we live in Larkspur. Larkspur is an incredible community. I've loved living here. And I would say that I would really advocate that we look at option 2 here, because what we're really considering is not just the parking scenario here, but the parking scenarios for all our districts. I think we're going to really struggle. I live on literally a block from here, and on the weekends it's extremely difficult to park here. Extremely difficult, and we have a lot of people coming to visit us, and Perez is extremely viable, and people want to go there, and it's going to get worse here. It's going to get worse. So I think it's going to be difficult for you people here to manage this. I really want you to have a vehicle to do that. So if you consider option 2 here, it allows the council to define parking districts. We're going to have multiple parking districts here. And then you have a special resolution for the Marina district, and they have to have to deal with the high school. So having that in place will allow you to move forward. It's going to get worse. San Francisco is not going away. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, please.
Hi.
Welcome.
My name is Meg Rafter, and I live on Riviera Circle. And I don't live at the outskirts. I live a little deeper in, and I have watched over the past 5 years, the cars are coming closer, and they just keep coming because they've learned not to park at the 20-minute signs, so now they park where there aren't 20-minute signs. But more than that, the reason I'm so on top of this, I called the police. I wish I had the statistics from my phone for how many times I've called the police, but when I spoke to the police last week, I was told it was going to be really hard to pull up statistics of how many times people called, how many tickets were given, so I didn't expect to see that. If I had, I could tell you that I probably call 35 times a week because it's insane what happens in our neighborhood. The kids are rude, they litter, they smoke pot, I don't know, well, I won't go there. But anyway, I have 3 little kids who aren't so little anymore, but when I first moved here, they would. They ride bikes to school, they walk to school, and I have seen kids fly by, even deep in the neighborhood. They come in the morning, do things in the cul-de-sacs, and then head off to school. And so they're coming by my house twice, driving fast, sometimes high. I've called the school to show them. I have pictures of kids getting high and then going to school, and my kids aren't safe. A couple weeks ago, April, whatever it was, May, I forget, I have the date written down, sorry. A kid was rushing back to school because he was going to be late from lunch. He opened his car door into an oncoming car and then proceeded to tell us that he didn't have a license and please don't call the police. His mother would come take the blame, and it was terrible. And this poor woman who was going to pick up her 2 little kids couldn't go pick up her kids because she had to wait with this kid while we did call the police and dealt with that. So I appreciate that the other neighborhoods are dealing with the same thing, and it's going to get worse for them. But all we're asking is to make it easier for the police to come through once as opposed to twice. And hopefully, yes, there'll be other issues. There'll be other ways to figure out the bigger problem for the whole Larkspur. But right now, this is what we're dealing with. And someone will get hurt. Someone did get hurt. The kid got hurt, frankly. He was the one that was bleeding. But if it's my kid that gets hurt, Redwood's on notice. We've told Redwood. They don't do anything. He says call the police. We call the police. I don't want to call the police. I tell the police that every day. I don't want to bother you, but Redwood's telling me I have to bother you. We don't know what to do. That's why we're asking for what we're asking for. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, sir. Who else would like to make comments this evening? Yes, sir.
Hi there. Mark Roth. I live in Camellia Circle in the Rose Lane development. And I just want to tell the people in the Marina that I'm totally sympathetic with their plight. I happen to be president of the senior facility there, the over 55, and though I'm not here in an official capacity, at the last meeting there were complaints about kids parking at the east end of Rose Lane, down by the police station, and kind of typical kind of behaviors. So obviously, as Dan points out astutely, if there's less parking in the Marina, it's going to move someplace else. So, I mean, my main consideration is that, whatever solution to the problem comes up is that it's done with the other neighborhoods involved. Rose Lane is a private, I believe the streets are private, so I don't know if that affects, the enforcement of traffic or the motor vehicle code in the neighborhood, but that's one concern. And I really think somebody has to force the school to take more responsibility. My son, when he was in high school, they had mandatory carpooling. If you weren't old enough to carpool, if you the 6-month no passenger rule, you couldn't come to school. You couldn't drive to school. You had to come up with other transportation. So I don't know what methods are available to get Redwood to take more responsibility for their students and for this particular issue, but my feeling is that it's never going to be solved appropriately until they do. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, sir. Right after Cindy. She's our Citizen of the Year. You got to give her.
Thank you, Mr.
Never
Mayor.
do.
I am going to praise Councilmember Morrison because she is so with it. She mentioned Uber Pool, and Lyft is doing the same thing. And the object is to get the kids to share these vehicles where they can be driven to school. It will be much safer. And then the vehicles just leave and they go off to serve others. So you don't need a parking lot. And it would certainly help the neighbors who are deservedly upset. I can understand it. But these complaints 10 years from now, I think they will be irrelevant. That's my shtick. But next Tuesday in San Francisco, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission is having a major meeting about autonomous vehicles. This is big time. To my knowledge, there has never been the discussion of these developments at such a high level, at least not in public. I think a lot of their
I
emphasis...
don't know that we're going to get into it on this agenda item, Cindy.
No, well, no, I'm concluding now.
Okay.
I think a lot of their discussion will be about getting people to and from transit. There's not that much difference getting people to and from school. So if I learn anything startling, I will tell you on July 20th.
Thank you very much. Mr. Knowles. Thank you.
Thank you. So I live on Diane Lane, which is right behind the Redwood, just down from Peter. And I actually went to Redwood in 1975. I think we had 2,700 students, but we didn't have any parking problems. I don't remember ever seeing a full parking lot or having any parking problems. So I'm not sure where that is all coming from. But we have more problems in Heather Gardens than just the kids parking. Some of the kids in Heather Gardens drive to school. My kids, we lived on Garden Way. I lived on Diane. My kids drove to Redwood. But there was parking. I don't understand where the parking is going. I guess we're getting more kids or whatever. But the other problem is that all the other schools come through there, like an intersection. All the kids from Hall, they come by the little park back there. They come around the corner by Liberty onto Heather, and they cut that corner next to the house with all the trees that you can't see.
On their bicycles.
On their bicycles, full speed, in the wrong lane. I mean, I've almost taken out several of them, almost, once a week. Can't expect the police to do everything. There's just no way. The parking's ridiculous. I've just resorted to the garbage can defense. I just roll out my garbage can and put it in that extra parking space, or make my car take up 2 spots, whatever I got to do. But the little kids, I'm kind of really worried about, because they don't seem to have any sense on the bikes at all, and I don't know who's responsible for that. Is that the school, the parents? They're the worst problem, is what I'm seeing right now. Well, the kids are always been speeding down there. I don't know, how that's ever going to stop. But it's a big scene there, between that little corner right there, right by kind of Dan's house and my house. I mean, it's like these people in Riviera Circle. It's crazy what goes on there in the mornings and the afternoons. And I've actually seen kids get dropped off from other kids. So they're coming into the neighborhood just to drop off the kid out of his car. But anyway, that was about it.
Common issues.
Yeah, I think that it's just there's a lot of people and the school's getting really big. Why can't they just tear down one of those baseball fields or something? We got plenty of those, huh? How about the one behind the library? That's close. It's not there. But behind the superintendent area, that whole field they don't even use. Just throwing it out there.
We'll be following up.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Matt Steicher. I also live in the Marina District on Riviera Circle. I've been there for about 12 years, and I will try and make my comments really brief, in part because, Mr. Mayor, of what you acknowledged, but also because I drove my neighbor, Jack Cooper, and he's about to fall asleep. It's past his bedtime. Yeah. So over time, the demographics of the neighborhood have changed. I moved in 12 years ago. My kids were 6 and 3 at the time. The neighborhood was predominantly retirees at the time. I believe I remember hearing a figure that the average age was in the late 70s within the Marina District. Over time, over the last 12 years, it's come down quite a bit as more and more young families have moved in. The fact that the demographics have changed, however, does not change the need for safety. So whether you have retirees walking their pets or whether you have little kids, safety is of paramount importance to those of us in the neighborhood. And what we've seen is an increasingly unsafe neighborhood. What has changed is the number of students at Redwood, which we heard earlier. Really interesting to have the statistics, the number of students that are actually driving, and the number of parking spots, therefore, that they just simply don't have at the school. Over the last several years, along with other neighbors, Patricia Steele lives right next door to me, and several others, we have attempted to bring the concerns both to the school and to the police. To their credit, Central Marine Police have been very, very responsive. When calls have been made, they have come out. They are there when you need them to be there, whether it's issuing citations or just simply having presence. Been very appreciative and very impressed by what CMP has done. However, because of limited staff, limited manpower, limited resources, different priorities, whatever, they can't obviously be there all the time. We're aware of that. And unfortunately, the other part of our outreach, the outreach to Redwood, Councilwoman Morrison, as you pointed out, has been ineffective at best. In fact, they have offered platitudes, and they have the concerns have mostly fallen on deaf ears at Redwood. And I couldn't have agreed more with what you said and then what you were saying just a minute ago about the role that they play in this. And I'm not even necessarily advocating for fewer permits, but I am saying they need to take more responsibility in these kids that are driving and that are choosing to park, whether it's in the Marina District or Magnolia or Heather Gardens or wherever it is. It's really, really dangerous for us. The power has largely been within them to make the changes that would protect our neighborhood, but they've refused. And that refusal to engage, I think, puts us in the position that we're in tonight. My preference would actually have not ultimately have needed to bring the council into this. I would have loved if we could have dealt with it and solved and resolved it with the team at Redwood. Their inability to engage, I think, brings us to the table tonight. So I don't feel it's too much to ask for our neighborhood to be safe for all, to be kept clean, because the litter is a real problem, and for the residents to be respected by the people who choose to park there. We've had massive signs of disrespect, whether it's verbal, whether it's with fingers, whatever it is. The kids there are choosing to act in a way that frankly is not in accordance with how and why we chose to live there. So I really appreciate you guys bringing us to the table. Dan, I really appreciate all the work that you did, and your report was great, and thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Laura Wilson-Hill, live in Monte Vista. Hi, Ann. I just want to say that I support everything the last guy just said, and I also want to say that what Ann said really resonated with me about Redwood. I think I have two kids who went to Redwood. I think that we need to put more heat on Redwood. Well, where's the representative from Redwood tonight? Is anybody here from Redwood? I don't think so. We're trying to solve this problem. I actually came here to talk about our own problem, which was all the restaurants parking on our street, but I'm all fired up now about this, this whole issue. And it just makes sense to me that we need to involve Redwood, like he was saying, like Ann was saying. I've never liked the idea that it's been an open, luncheon thing, and they give you, 32 minutes, and you have to, it's almost a scenario for disaster. So I think that we need to look at every aspect of this thing, and we definitely need to, there have to be somebody has to come to the table from Redwood to help us resolve this, because they're part of the problem, and they need to be part of the solution.
I can tell you they were personally notified.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Where are they? Not here.
Thank you for your comments. Jean? How many other members of the public want to make comments or ask questions tonight? All right, Jean, you'll be the last one.
All right, Jean Severinghouse. I actually live on the other side of the freeway in East Greenbrae, and we also have parking problems there. I went to Redwood even before you did, and there were 3,400 students there at the time, and we had 0 parking problems. So I don't think it's increasing students when you go from 1,200 to 1,900. That's right. Actually, my dad told me, here's your 3-speed bike, go. So that's how I got to Redwood, from Ross. It's not that far. So there's got to be better solutions. And I know in Safe Routes to School we've talked about this, and the vice principal did a bang-up job of actually organizing carpools and getting, what did he do it, from 130 students down to 130 cars down to...
But they only had 20 spaces, right?
No, they actually... As they grew more demand, they actually marked off a few. They did a really big job to try to get carpooling. So I do think they're responsive if we approach them the right way.
Right. We need to keep doing it, exactly.
Well put. All right, we're going to close the public comment and bring this back to the council for discussion. Councilmember Chu, would you like to start?
Yeah, Ann's now our Safe Routes to School rep, but when I was that rep, I can verify for you that, let's see, my daughter's 24, so if you go back to her 10 years ago, we knew these issues were issues then, and they didn't do much about it back then. So, you know, again, we had notified Redwood, or at least I had notified Redwood personally, at least 2 members of their board, and they passed the information on to their administration. So they said that they were going to take a watch and see approach to this. I don't know what their response is going to be. But being that my family, because my wife was the Safe Routes to School rep at Redwood, we were directly engaged with trying to reduce the vehicular trips to the school, and nobody was amenable to it. So, you know, I would like, in terms of our discussion tonight, to look at option number 2 only because it affects other neighborhoods. You know, I don't want to get in a situation where still like to provide relief, immediate relief for the Marina, but we also need to take into consideration the surrounding neighborhoods. And the only thing I can think of right now, because of the lack of response from Redwood, is what I call the nuclear option. And, you know, that's basically, we almost have to create this similar policy for all the surrounding neighborhoods that are impacted, and that's probably the only way that they're going to respond to dealing with the parking problem. But there's also a larger problem. They're not being good citizens. And, you know, Mike wants to take a non-discriminatory approach to enforcement, but the fact is we have a segment of the population that we have identified as, let's just say, bad behavior. So that's a separate type of enforcement, but if it means eliminating that from the environment, then that improves the quality of life for the surrounding neighborhoods. Let's think of it in a broader sense. Most of the parents are not going to vote for you anyway, because those families are coming from outside the district.
Well, they live on Diane Lane.
Yeah, well, they do, but what I'm saying is that a lot of times we get pressure from the surrounding communities for things that Larkspur does because we happen to be the hub of the Ross Valley. And in many respects, I say that other comment jokingly, but really the broader issue is that we need to sometimes focus on what's best for our residents rather than the convenience of people who don't live here.
All right, you're in favor of option 2.
Yeah, I'd like to pursue option 2, but also cognizant of, you know, for discussion purposes, we're not making a decision tonight, but also to be cognizant of trying to find some immediate relief for the
as in
Marina before
what
the
would
school
go in the
starts
resolution.
Yeah, before school starts again.
Of course.
All right.
And I think just having this conversation alone is going to put some pressure on Redwood, so that excites me.
Vice Mayor Morrison?
So, Jack, I flew in from Sydney this afternoon, so it's 4 a.m. for me, so you're staying awake. So I want to make sure I understand correctly. If we do the permit, does that mean everyone that parks in the marina has to have a permit or a guest permit? Is that? Residents. Is that what I'm hearing?
So, I've been accused more than once of playing semantics, and I assure you I am not. I don't think the signs are technically legal because they don't say you're exempt with a permit. I believe the signs need to say somewhere on them that possession of a permit exempts you from the regulation. So the signs have got to change, period, because the police are operating a permit system. I think the right signage throughout the neighborhood is by permit parking only, which is a common sign in cities that have adopted that approach.
So if a resident student
I permit parking only, and then the separate thing that you can adopt by resolution is who gets to have a permit and how many permits they get to have. Or you can ask the Marina POA for input on that
Right.
particular
So students,
conversation.
with what you just said, students will not be able to park in the marina at all.
They wouldn't possess a permit,
I
so they
understand.
would,
I just
if
wanna
they
make
parked
sure.
there, they could get a citation. And I heard Councilmember Chu say he'd
go
like
get to Redwood and-
he'd like to possibly explore Redwood being able to issue short-term, one-day permits to visitors and things like that.
That's a great idea.
Which
Okay.
does speak to, we did have one person who I think wrote to you and said, back in the day when it was 2 hours, I could go do my appointment at Redwood, and now I can't go to my appointment at Redwood. So-
Okay, so understanding that, I'm okay with option 2 also. Thank you, Dan.
Councilmember Way.
Thank you, everybody, for your comments tonight. This is a complex problem because we got a big school and we have neighborhoods that'll push out to. And when we closed Doherty and put a red zone in there a number of years ago, that was where the sophomores parked. It was called Sophomore Row. Now they park in Heather Gardens. So I see it. It'll just keep spreading out further and further. And they could go over the beam, over the berm there and into Corte Madera. And, I mean, we have to look at this holistically, as some of you commented on. While I feel that the immediate impact is for the 181 days of school is really right there in the marina, that's just the tip now of what'll happen if we limit this to just the marina. I think we have to do the holistic approach as Dan introduced us with, which is to really look at possibly some parking districts within Larkspur and recognize that our residents have priority of parking in our neighborhoods. So I'm interested in that. While I feel for the people in the marina, I think it would just be a Band-Aid on a larger hemorrhage that we're going to have to deal with eventually. So, and when we do this discussion again and come back to them, if we could have some representation from Redwood to answer some of these questions, I think a lot of our community members would be pleased to have the opportunity to ask about their open campus rule. I don't know if we're going to open that can of worms, but there's a lot of behaviors of students that have been outlined here that are not sustainable by neighborhoods. So. But I've been a high school student, and I know it's a hard task to try to control some of those behaviors when they're not directly in your field of vision.
You know, we also tried to address the open campus rule with Twin Cities Coalition for Healthy Youth.
Yeah,
They wouldn't touch it.
I know.
So,
I would be neglectful if I did not mention that we have many important collaborations with Redwood High School.
Yeah, I was wondering if you might entertain one editorial comment from the city manager.
Sure.
Thank you. So one of my prized possessions since I've worked here is an email from a parent when we closed Doherty Drive. And the email's rather lengthy, and it might be from someone who doesn't live in Larkspur, Councilmember Chu. But it goes on to great length to say, I must not understand children because there's no way to get my child to change his behavior to go on a different driving route to Redwood while you fix Doherty Drive. And he's going to be late to school, and you're responsible for that. It's one of my favorite possessions. But it also speaks to something. I don't mind periodically throwing my friends at Tamalpais Union High School District under the bus, because once in a while we don't get along. So that's okay, and they don't mind if they throw me under the bus once in a while. But we have societal problems, and to blame them for societal issues isn't really fair. So I don't mind couching it as, we'd love to be better informed about their parking plan and why they issue so many permits, and they may have a logic to that. And I'm being told the reason they won't close the campus is the state rules around cafeteria service. They physically can't meet to close the campus. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I'm being told. And I'm very familiar with how convoluted and crazy the ed code is, so I kind of believe that story. So I'd be happy to get a Redwood rep here to answer those types of questions, but I hope we won't turn it into a forum to demand that Redwood change societal behavior, because that's just not going to be fair.
Well, point well
to them.
taken. But I think the specifics like their permitting process and how they
Sure.
initiate
I'd be happy
750
to
for
arrange
300
that.
spots.
Well,
And
we have a great relationship with
Yeah.
Marina, too.
Yeah, and we do. And the staff has very good working relationship with the principal. I'm sure he'd be happy to find a meeting he could come to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say they're all good people there, but, I have to say, though, some of my discussions have gone back a decade, and we really haven't moved the needle. So, I find that a little frustrating as well.
Sure.
All very valuable. We do share their campus with our Public Works Department. So we want to make sure that we are always leaving communication channels open and don't say things that would otherwise give them the impression we aren't grateful. All right, Councilmember Haro.
Thank you. I just want to say, first of all, that I kind of endorsed option number 2 and hope we go forward with that. I think that's a desirable thing, and I'd like to see it fleshed out in the form of an ordinance and potential resolutions. Getting the material from Novato is helpful. I just wanted to just also ask a question, and this may be for both the chief and for the city manager. On the existing permit system, that's not a city permit system. That's a permit system that was initiated by Twin Cities Police. Is my understanding about that correct?
Yes, my understanding is that the city staff stated when this conversation originally occurred that they weren't in a position or interested in administering that, and the chief of police at that time said he was willing to administer a permit system.
Okay, and is that consistent with your understanding, Chief?
I don't know the history of it. Like I said, we don't issue that many, but anyone who's a resident, we do issue one too. And when I looked the last 5 years, we've only had 40 requests and issued 40 permits. They're $5. They're for the life of your vehicle. If you do buy a new car, you have to come in and get another permit. So.
Okay. Well, the point I'm trying to address here is that there is a permit system that is in place that was initiated by the police authority and is overseen by the police authority, not by the city of Larkspur. So I'm assuming my understanding is correct that any action that we take with respect to the adoption of an ordinance at a future meeting and future resolutions to implement a city controlled permit system would not affect the existing permit system that is being implemented by the police authority. Is that a good understanding? I don't see how they have any effect.
If we ultimately codify by
Yes.
ordinance or resolution that there will be a official permit system, then the police would need to administer that permit system per the specifics of what you've outlined.
In lieu of the existing permit system at that time.
Yeah. See, I was a little glib earlier. The way I would probably argue, city attorney's probably going to cringe while I say this, but I'd argue to a judge that the chief and his officers are exercising their prosecutorial discretion with respect to the current 20-minute parking zone by issuing a piece of paper to certain people and saying, if you're in possession of that paper, we're going to exempt you from
Right.
prosecution.
And that's a function of just the
That's
kind of
their
ad hoc
authority.
nature of the permit system.
That's their
been
authority, but
implemented.
once you start codifying
Right.
the system, they need to follow, the police need to follow what you codify.
I understand, but I guess my point is, by considering this issue tonight, we're not giving any direction to the police authority.
Oh, no, the status quo will be in place until you change it.
Right, so that the permit system that is in place today, however you characterize it, will remain in place tomorrow,
Yep.
notwithstanding any direction
Yep.
we give to you tonight.
That's right.
So we're not affecting that in any way. In fact, what we're trying to do is to formalize the system that is in place through a new mechanism in accordance with an ordinance and a series of resolutions that we might adopt in the future.
That's correct. Yes,
Okay.
I agree.
So I
with that.
just want to raise that because Ms. Steele, did talk about the permit system that is in place, and I want to provide assurance to the residents of that neighborhood that nothing we do today takes away from that. The only thing that what may happen as a result of this was we may fiddle with those signs, which is probably a good idea, but right now, that we're not changing the status quo as it exists in the Marina neighborhood.
That's correct. Unless and until you as the legislative body declare the administrative actions from the 90s invalid, they're valid. So the system in place is valid.
And I don't think we're contemplating that tonight, so-
I didn't hear you were either.
Yeah, no.
I think we're
So,
okay.
you know, with that understanding about the existing arrangements that are in effect over there, I'm very supportive of option number 2.
All right. I have a question for the city manager and then the council. Option 2, if the words, following the words parking districts, if the words in residential neighborhoods were removed from the option language, the functionality would remain, but it would allow us to have flexibility with respect to commercial districts. Would the purpose of that with respect to your intention for tonight change if we remove those words?
Well, I think if what you're trying to get at, Mr. Mayor, is you want to make sure the long-term broader system addresses commercial areas, the code actually already gives the staff a fair amount of latitude and discretion in the terms of signage in the business districts. And so we were only speaking to signage and creation of time constraints in the residential neighborhoods.
Could you do residential and/or?
Well, I was just thinking if we had the flexibility to define parking districts by resolution
Why don't you just say parking?
without
districts and
reference to
neighborhoods?
commercial and
How
residential.
about on the item, I bring it back and we'll go over the whole code section.
Okay, but I think it's valuable to see this as a citywide strategy.
I don't disagree with that. I just, in terms of what we actually changed the municipal code to read, I think what you're getting at already exists for business districts. And so that's why the language on the slide was
Okay.
intended to focus on residential districts.
All right, with that, there seems to be consensus.
There isn't, there's just.
My understanding is you would like us to bring back option 2, and then we'll bring with it a resolution for the Marina neighborhood. I didn't hear specifically about 20 minutes versus permit parking only, 20 minutes with permit or no parking unless with a permit. We could bring you resolutions for both. You can punt that decision to another night if you're tired, no problem.
Sounds
We
good.
can do that. So-
Do your best to bring something back that manages the existing and allows us to think about this in the future.
That'd be fine. We'll also get clarity from the police about express preference of 2 visits versus 1, which I think was driving some of the thought process.
All right, is that adequate direction?
That sounds
And
perfect.
just for the
Yeah.
community to know, we don't have a meeting in August, and we have one meeting in July, so we're looking at September.
Well, I think we can bring the first part of this in July, which would at least signal to the community what will be in place in the Marina when,
Yeah, I think we want
you
to,
know, we may not make it exactly to day 1 of the school year, but we could get closer by.
well, we want to use our time between now and when school opens. All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Chu.
One other thing, if this changes staffing because of enforcement, or at least how you use your hours, you know, maybe you can report back to the council on that as well.
We can do a
Yeah.
deeper assessment of that.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you all, everybody, for attending, taking part.
But we're not done.
They're done.
Just kidding. Bye.
We'll take a 2-minute recess and allow everybody to go. Session, the 8.4, appointments to the Heritage Preservation Board and the Parks and Recreation Commission. Is there a staff report? I'd like to get a little clarity on where we are with the Heritage Preservation appointment.
You've now, I think, interviewed the candidates,
There's
correct?
one, right?
The one
Yeah. That's Jan Hubble.
Mr. Hubble, Ms. Hubble.
candidate.
All right.
think you
So
pronounced it
that one's
wrong.
set. There seems to be consensus on Parks and Rec. Would somebody like to make a motion?
For Park and Rec?
Yes.
And for the Heritage appointment, which we already mentioned.
Okay, I'm going to nominate Victoria Harrison for the position of Park and Rec.
I'll second that.
All right, so the motion is to appoint Ms. Harrison to the Parks and Rec Commission and Ms. Hobble to... Mr. Hobble to the Heritage Board. All right.
Yeah.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I do want to say what,
Good job.
thank you for all the
Yeah, I would like
applicants.
to make sure that we stay in touch with the applicants, especially on the Park and Rec side. They were all interested in helping in many other ways. Thank you very much tonight. Motion to adjourn? Oh, we have a closed session, that's right. Leave the open session, go into closed sessions, subject to Government Code Section 54957. It's a public employee performance evaluation. We will report out any action. The council discussed, the mayor, current mayor, past mayor recommend the council appoint a subcommittee to negotiate a contract with the city manager, an amendment to the contract with the city manager, and that is our reportable action.
Okay.
All right.
I move to adjourn the
Is there
meeting.
a second?
I'll second that.
Motion to adjourn. Second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.